Chapter 313. The person who came to Fan Manor to announce the edict was Eunuch Yao. With the sound of 3 cannons, the Fan Manor busied themselves for a while before setting up the incense table and setting up the routine. Everyone in the manor waited in the Great Hall. The Great Prince and the Northern She Princess did not find it convenient to stay in the manor, so they left. However, the Imperial Doctor remained resolutely in the study. The Imperial Edict entering the manor was a major event. Even Fan Xian was forced to be carried out of his bedroom. Fortunately, the palace remembered that he was recovering from his injuries, so they ordered him not to get out of bed to receive the edict. It could be considered a special favor. He listened to Eunuch Yao's sharp voice and found that the Emperor had indeed rewarded a lot of things this time. It took a while for him to finish reading them. Naturally, he did not take these rewards to heart, so he did not listen carefully. On the contrary, he felt that the eunuch's voice was very hypnotic. Lying on the warm and soft couch, his eyelids were slightly closed. He was about to fall asleep. Minister Fan coughed gently and used his gaze to remind Fan Xian. After a slight shock, Wanner gently pinched Fan Xian's palm. Only then did he manage to open his eyes. In the end, he only heard something about 500 bolts of silk, how many mu of land, how many gold ingots, how many silver ingots. In the end, there was nothing new. The Fan family lacked everything, but not silver. This was something that the Qing people knew, so the Emperor was not prepared to make too much compensation to Fan Xian in this area. He only had Fan Xian restore his title of nobility and conveniently raise Fan Jian by 1 rank. Father and son shared the glory. After the official edict was announced, everyone in the hall silently dispersed. Only then did Eunuch Yao begin to quietly read the Emperor's secret edict. The secret edict was not secret, but the benefits of this edict could not be announced everywhere. Fan Xian's spirit rose, hearing that the Emperor had transferred 7 tiger guards to him. Only then did he feel that the Emperor was not too stingy. In his joy, he unconsciously left out the Emperor's other 2 edicts. Presently, what he was most worried about was his own personal safety. Next year, he was going to Jiangnan. Who knew if he would be able to recover his Junqi at that time? Uncle Wu Zhu was increasingly not taking his life seriously. He still had to rely on himself. Outside the garden, Fan Xian saw the 7 familiar tiger guards. The leader was Gouda. These tiger guards had accompanied him on a diplomatic mission to Northern Qi a few months ago, so of course they were acquaintances. Now that they had been sent by the Emperor to protect Commissioner Fan, they were very happy. Staying with Sir Fan Jr. was much more comfortable than staying in the darkness behind the Emperor. Furthermore, Sir Fan Jr. was skilled in martial arts, so they did not have to worry too much. Led by Gao De, the tiger guards with long knives on their backs half-knelt on the ground and saluted Fan Xian in unison. "Greetings, Commissioner." Fan Xian coughed twice and smiled. "Rise. We are all old acquaintances. From now on, my life depends on you." The tiger guards thought Sir Fan Jr. was joking, but they didn't know how to respond. They laughed dryly, not knowing that Fan Xian was speaking the truth. With the 7 tigers by his side, even if Haidang suddenly went crazy and wanted to kill him, he would not be afraid or helpless. "Go see father first." Fan Xian gazed at Gouda and said in a quiet voice, "Although normally, you shouldn't do this. Since you're going to follow me, there is no need to be too cautious." Gouda nodded. He was very grateful to Commissioner Fan for pointing it out. He walked excitedly toward the front of the manor in a rush to see his old boss. Embroidered pillow, fine wine, clothes? There's even a musical instrument? Fan Xian was in his room. Only now did he begin to listen carefully to the list of rewards. He glanced at his wife and forced a smile. "Although I was once a functionary, I never knew how to play this. It's just the rules of the palace," Lin Wanner explained. Seeing Fan Xian's hesitant expression, she did not say that the rewards included things like toilet bowls. At this moment, the garden in the back of the manor was a mess. Tung Zijing was outside the manor arranging for people to receive the rewards from the palace, while the Tung family was busy in the storeroom sorting things. If there were some important things, they had to come to the room to ask for the young mistress's permission. Seeing the wife of the Tang family sweating profusely from running in the cold, Fan Xian couldn't resist sighing and saying, "Is this a reward or punishment?" The wife of the Tang family beamed and said, "Even if it's a stitch or a thread, it can't be sloppy. This is all a blessing from the palace. In all of Jingdo, who else can receive so many rewards at once? The young master has gained a lot of face this time." "Rewards can't be eaten," Fan Xian said self-mockingly. "Using one's life to exchange for face, it's better to not want it." Lin Wanner opened her mouth almost at the same time as him. Both husband and wife looked down on this reward. Wanner probably still felt that the emperor's uncle had bad intentions and hoped that the more generous the reward, the more her husband would block a knife for him in the future. "The emperor is truly stingy," Fan Xian said with a smile. "When you reported the amount of gold and silver, I listened carefully. That amount is truly pitiful." Lin Wanner smiled and said, "You still care about that? It's just a meaning. The more complicated the reward, the more it shows the emperor's concern for your injury. How can I not care?" Fan Xian raised his brows and said, "Our family is completely relying on that bookstore to support us. It's not good to have to go to the front manor and ask my father for use, right? He does have a lot of silver in his hands, but I can't always live off the elderly." The words "live off the elderly" were simple. Lin Wanner vaguely understood. She smiled and saw that there were no idle people in the room. In a quiet voice, she teased, "Don't you have a brothel? I hear that one can earn tens of thousands of liang of silver a month." Fan Xian laughed in spite of himself. "That's Xiaoshi's. Don't push it on me." Lin Wanner faked a spit at him and muttered, "In front of your own family, you're still pretending. Don't you find it tiring?" "I have to pretend at all times. It's best if I can even fool myself. Why did Big Brother find you earlier?" Lin Wanner opened her eyes wide and asked curiously. Fan Xian thought for a moment and said, "He doesn't want to be the commander of the Imperial Army. He wanted to see if I had any ideas." Lin Wanner furrowed her brows slightly and said, "Given Big Brother's personality, he certainly doesn't want to stay in the capital." Fan Xian smiled coldly and said, "Who wants to stay in the capital?" However, the emperor does not feel at ease leaving such a son, who is so good at fighting, to always lead troops outside. These words were rather bold and sinister. Wanner's heart couldn't help but tremble. "You're becoming more and more careless with your words. I can only speak more plainly in front of you." Fan Xian sighed. "I am willing to help His Highness, but I am just an official. I have no right to speak on these matters. I really do not know how His Highness is so blinded by lard that he has the courage to speak so clearly to me. Perhaps Big Brother thinks for my sake you won't harm him." Lin Wanner smiled bitterly. Ever since he was young, his way of thinking has always been this simple. The water in Jingdo is too deep. I've swum for half a day and found that I still haven't reached the bottom. Fan Xian furrowed his brows and said, "When we go to Jiangnan in the spring, you and I will go together. We will strive to stay there for a while longer and truly stop for a while. I just don't know when the time comes. Will the court give you the identity of an imperial envoy to investigate the palace treasury first, or directly give you an empty position?" Lin Wanner analyzed seriously. "If I have the identity of an imperial envoy, I can't bring my family. If, in name, I have to stay in Jiangnan for a long time, it's fine for me to go." Fan Xian shook his head and said, "Who cares how they arrange it? In any case, I'm going to take you." "These words are unreasonable," Lin Wanner said with a smile. There was a bit more sweetness in her heart. She also understood that, given Fan Xian and her identity, no matter how much they broke the rules, no one dared to say anything. However, she didn't know whether or not the ladies in the palace would agree to her going to Jiangnan. Her body had been weak since she was young. The furthest she had gone was the winter she had spent in the Tsang Mountains last year. Hearing Fan Xian say that it seemed that she might go to the legendary picturesque Jiangnan to see, she was very happy. Don't overstep the bounds. She suddenly thought of something. Looking at Fan Xian, she said, "Although the emperor has sent a secret edict for the Tiger Guards to protect you, the people of Jingdo will eventually know. Although you are heavily injured and the Tiger Guards have a good reason to come, The tiger guard's identity is different. It will be very eye-catching by your side. Fan Xian stretched out his hand to stroke the slightly prickly beard on his lips and said with a smile, "Relax, the Emperor is a clever person. The reason he had the tiger guards come to the manor is to protect you, the princess." A knocking sound came from outside the room. Fan Xian shook his head angrily. He was not angry that someone had come to disturb him at this time. Rather, he found that after he had lost all his Jinqi, he was far less sensitive to the changes in his surroundings. At least, he could no longer hear the sound of approaching footsteps far in advance. Fan Ruo led the imperial physician into the room. Seeing that Lin Wanner was also in the room, the imperial physician hurriedly bowed in a panic and then turned his face away. The Qin kingdom was not like northern Qi. It did not have as many rules between men and women. Furthermore, the imperial physician was old enough to be Wanner's grandfather. His pedantic action immediately made everyone in the room laugh. Father said that since you are in good spirits, you should talk to the imperial physician. Fan Ruo looked at her brother with a pained smile. Fan Xian's heart chilled. He knew that his shameless father had finally been unable to withstand the imperial physician's painstaking efforts and had pushed him to his pitiful son to handle. However, he had long made up his mind about the request of the Imperial Academy of Medicine. Smiling merrily, he gazed at the imperial physician and said, "Sir, I understand why you have come." The imperial physician opened his mouth to speak, but Fan Xian quickly stopped him. "However, with my appearance, it is impossible for me to leave the manor to teach." He looked at the old man's angry expression and said, "However, I will dictate some content in the manor, print it into a book, and send it to you." The imperial physician stroked his beard and seemed to feel that this was a pretty good result. After a moment of silence, he said, "It's just that in the way of medicine, the most important thing is to teach personally. It's not very appropriate to just look at books." Fan Xian took a few breaths and said, "After the book comes out, if there are any difficulties, I will have Ruo explain it." Hearing this, the imperial physician's face was full of fear. How could we let Miss Fan show her face in public? During the operation in the palace, he had watched from the side. He knew that Miss Fan had personally performed the acupuncture. He had never doubted her methods. "Ruo doesn't know much. I still have to teach her at home." Fan Xian sighed. "I presume that the great prince has already conveyed my opinion. This matter cannot progress too deeply. However, there are still some things that we should pay attention to. We can discuss them with the imperial physicians." He continued to smile. "Furthermore, my teacher is about to return to the capital. When that time comes, he will be responsible for teaching at the Imperial Academy of Medicine. His skills are much better than Roro's." After a moment of joy, the imperial physician became slightly worried. "Mr. Fei, back in the day, I invited him a few times, but he didn't come. There was nothing I could do. I will go ask the emperor for an edict. Don't worry." Fan Xian comforted the old man in front of him, as if he were comforting a child. His lips curled into a mischievous smile. After the imperial physician left, satisfied, Fan Ruo cried out in surprise, "Brother, I don't know anything. That night, I only did what you told me to do. There was no other way." Fan Xian smiled helplessly. "I wrote down the easy parts of disinfection and isolation of infection. As for the rest, I'll wait for my teacher to come back. You can also learn from him." Fan Ruo was stunned. Shortly after, a glow appeared on her face. She nodded her head. Fan Xian and his wife did not expect their sister to agree so readily. They looked at her, not knowing what to say. "Brother, you always said that in life, one must find what they like to do the most and then continue to do it." Fan Ruo lowered her head and said shyly, "That night, although I didn't do much, I saw you come back to life. Only then did I know that saving someone can be so happy. So, even if you didn't have this arrangement today, I would still ask you for medical advice." Fan Xian's mouth opened wide, and he couldn't speak for a long time. Could it be that his reckless actions would cause the kingdom of Qin to have a female doctor? But he didn't know if Fei Jie would teach a female disciple. In the end, would his sister become Hua Bianc or Fenghua? No, it couldn't be a female monster like Hua Bianc. Of course, It had to be the beautiful queen mother of the West like Feng Hua. Fan Xian looked at his sister's beautiful face, which was becoming more and more vivid because of her excitement. He comforted himself. At the very least, it had to be a Qing version of the Changjing. Night fell. Cece laid out the bedding and turned the vent of the heater just right. Then, she left the room with Siki, who had brought in water. The couple lay quietly on the bed, watching the candles outside gradually dim. They didn't make a sound for a long time. Can't sleep? Yes. I slept too much in the middle of the day. What about you? Why can't you sleep today? I remember when we were in the Tsang Mountains, you slept like a kitten every day. Speaking of cats, I wonder how Xiao Bai, Xiao Huang, and Xiao He are doing. Master Tung took them to the country estate. You were the one who told him to do so. Why are you thinking about them now? Fan Xian opened his eyes and smiled. Lin Wanner quietly muttered, You were the one who said cats were bad for pregnancy. Fan Xian was startled. He smiled bitterly and didn't say anything. He couldn't tell her that he actually hated cats in front of her, could he? Whether it was the old cat or the kitten, seeing their lazy and cunning faces made him angry. Husband, am I very useless? Lin Wanner turned her body to the side and breathed on Fan Xian's face. It's a bit itchy. Help me scratch it. Fan Xian motioned for his wife to scratch his face. He asked curiously, Why did you suddenly ask this? Lin Wanner gently scratched his ear. In the dark, she pouted her lips and said, The people around you all seem to have their own strengths. They can all help you. Xijia knows how to do business, and Ruoruo wants to learn medicine. She is famous for being a talented woman in the capital. Young Master Yin helps you take care of things. Let's talk about Hai Tang in the north. Fan Xian coughed violently. He almost tore open the wound on his chest. Wanner gently touched the area above his wound. She is also a strange woman. I'm afraid she also wants to bring peace and stability to the country. Only I have been weak since I was a child. I was spoiled by so many people in the palace, but I can't do anything. I can't do anything. I can't do anything. Fan Xian understood what his wife meant. After a moment of silence, he said, Wanner, there are some things I haven't told you. Huh? In life, it's not good to be useful, and it's bad to be useless. He said gently, These roles are actually not what people like us are willing to play. For example, my initial wish was to be a wealthy and idle person. Take in Bingyan, for example. In fact, he is not willing to be the head of a spy for the rest of his life. It's not like you did not see the situation between him and Miss Shan. And for me, Wanner, you are very special. A gentle smile rose to the corners of Fan Xian's lips, but his gaze did not look at his wife by the pillow. You grew up in the palace. It was such a dirty and dangerous place, yet it did not change your temperament. You grew freely like a green lotus, and I, who was lucky, casually plucked it. This in itself is a rare thing. Wanner listened to these words of love. Her heart was filled with sweetness, but she still felt sad. But, in the end, Fan Xian stopped her from continuing. And, Wanner, you are very capable. Even your brother can't say he can beat you at mahjong. The husband and wife laughed. Plus, I know what you are really good at. Fan Xian was silent for a moment, then said very seriously, You are much more experienced in judging the direction of the court than I am, and your vision is very accurate. After the spring examination, if you hadn't been active in the palace, I wouldn't have been able to live so freely. I believe that if you were to help me plan and strategize, your ability would be no less than Yan Bingyun's. It's just, Lin Wanner opened her bright eyes. They were strangely calm. It's just what? It's just that I don't want you to be involved in these things, Fan Xian said decisively. These things are too dirty. I don't want you to get involved. You're my wife. I have a responsibility to let you live a relaxed and happy life. I don't want you to be sad all day long. I am a male chauvinist, he concluded with a smile. At least in this area. After a long time, Wanner sighed. There's a trace of satisfaction and comfort in her sigh. She said quietly, I am a member of the royal family. In the future, there are some things you shouldn't let me hear. Although I know you trust me, you also said that these things are very dirty. It is difficult for a husband and wife to avoid it. I don't want you to suspect me in the future. I would rather you not tell me those things. Her marriage to Fan Xian was arranged by the emperor. There was a clear hint of politics in it. But the heavens were kind, allowing this young man and woman to use a chicken leg as a matchmaker and talk about their love through the window. Compared to a normal political marriage, it was much more stable. But in the face of politics, what did it matter how close a husband and wife were? This kind of tragedy was not rare in history. Furthermore, the eldest princess was her birth mother, so Wanner's words were not pretentious at all. She was not taking a step back in order to advance. She was truly thinking for Fan Xian. Don't think so much, Fan Xian said calmly and firmly. Fan Xian calmly and firmly said, if a person live one's life and cannot even trust the person closest to them, then what need is there to continue living such a pitiful life? What he wanted to say was, if he had a chance to start his life over again, but he had to constantly be on guard against the person next to him, then he would rather not have been reborn. The first snow fell in Jingdou. Small snowflakes floated to the ground. They melted as soon as they touched the mud and were difficult to accumulate. The damp and cold in the private residences gradually grew heavier. Fortunately, the Qing kingdom was at its peak and had abundant supplies. Even the homes of the common people did not have to worry about keeping warm. From a distance, one could see the places where the common people gathered. The black eaves of the houses gave off wisps of mist. Presumably, there were heaters in the houses. It was a very ordinary carriage. After making countless turns in the capital, it finally arrived in front of the courtyard of a private residence with its own gate. It was a cold day, and no one was on the streets. It was quiet all around. Naturally, no one saw the face of the person who came out of the carriage. Deng Ziyue carefully lifted Fan Xian into a wheelchair and pushed him into the small courtyard. Fan Xian was wearing a large cloak with a collar that reached past his neck. It was very warm. He put his hand to his lips and blew out a breath of hot air. He glanced at the young man in the corner of the courtyard, who was chopping firewood under Su Wanmao's instructions. He was slightly surprised. The young man's features were somewhat familiar. His upper body was bare, and he did not show the slightest fear of the cold in this winter. He kept chopping firewood. This is Si Lily's brother? Fan Xian narrowed his eyes and looked at the young man. It seemed that he wanted to see the shadow of the girl from Northern Kingdom in him. Deng Ziyue softly grunted. After Sir gave the order, the director issued a warrant, and we took him out of prison. Lady C has entered the Northern Qi royal palace. His identity is a bit sensitive, and it is not easy to settle him down. After asking for instructions last time, we arranged for him to be sent here. Fan Xian nodded. This small courtyard was his only private property. Apart from himself and the Qinian unit, probably only Chun Pingping knew about it. It was the safest place. The reason why he had come here today, despite his injuries, was because His Majesty had transferred the Tiger Guards to him. Although the existence of these Tiger Guards could ensure his safety, there were certainly eyes and ears for His Majesty among them. Thinking that it would be difficult for him to come here so easily in the future, he had braved the snow to come here today. This Master C is a reckless man. For his sister, he ran from Northern Qi to the Kingdom of Qing. There is no guarantee that he won't run out of this courtyard in a few days. Fan Xian clenched his fist and coughed lightly. Keep a close eye on him. If he makes any strange movements, kill him. Deng Ziyue expressionlessly responded. He pushed Fan Xian into the room, and the wheelchair rolled over the muddy snow on the ground. An Overwatch Council official came out to greet him. Seeing the commissioner in the wheelchair, he couldn't help but feel a chill in his heart. It seemed that he was hallucinating that the Kingdom of Qing had produced another terrifying Chun Pingping. To be continued. If you want to know what happened next, please log on to www.cmfu.com. More chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 314. The manor next to Shenzheng Road in the capital had never had many people staying there. The main task here was to pass on Fan Xian's orders and receive information from Shangjing's Wang Qinian. Si Lily's brother and the others all lived in the wing. The room was set aside for Fan Xian to work in, so naturally, there was no way to light a fire. Although they knew the commissioner was coming today and had already sent out a heater, there was still a lot of cold in the room, and it couldn't be dispersed. Fan Xian sat in his wheelchair, feeling the cold in the room. He couldn't help but shake his hands and smile bitterly. You can't even bear to light a heater. Is the manner that poor? Deng Ziyu was warming an inkstone on the stove. He called for his subordinates to bring some hot water to melt the frozen brush. Hearing Fan Xian's words, he smiled bitterly. Sir, you've been busy these days, and you've been injured. The servants didn't prepare for you to come today. With great difficulty, he was almost done. Fan Xian propped his head up and watched Deng Ziyu desperately grind the ink block against the warmed inkstone, mixing it with warm water. It was as if he was sharpening a knife. After a while, he finally ground out some juice. Fan Xian nodded with satisfaction. It seemed that his new confidant skill was not much worse than that of a royal doctor. He dipped the melted brush into the inkstone, dipped it in some ink, and wrote a few words on the snow-white paper. Damn, the ink froze again. What kind of weather is this? Fan Xian was furious. He threw the charred brush on the table and cursed. How come it's not this cold at home? Deng Ziyu felt a gust of cold wind blowing around the room. He carefully replied, The furnaces in the Fu are much better. When we first bought this courtyard, we did not prepare them. We did not even have time to heat up the Kong bed. I'm not sleeping here, Fan Xian said angrily. Fan Xian said angrily, You and Lao Wang are both so stingy. Back then, I gave Wang Qinian 1,000 liang of silver, and he only spent 120 liang to buy this rundown courtyard. Do you want to freeze me to death? Deng Ziyu felt some sympathy for his predecessor, who was far away in northern Qi and was being scolded by the commissioner every day. He carefully said, It's peaceful. It's not just quiet. Fan Xian glanced at him and said hatefully, It's called cold. If the officials in the capital were to see this, I'm afraid they would really think the Overwatch Council is just a small yamen. He had a few important letters to write today, so he couldn't care less. He tried his best to use the brush, but in the end, he couldn't use it smoothly. After struggling for a while, he finally gave up. He slammed the desk and shouted, Give me that brush. Deng Ziyu dawdled for a while and finally took out a pen from his clothes-fitting clothes. As he was about to hand it to Fan Xian, his expression became cautious. This pen is expensive. I heard that the palace treasury doesn't have much left. Please use it sparingly. Fan Xian snatched it and looked at him with disdain. It was just a pencil. Why was it so expensive? When we go to Jiangnan and find a few more graphite mines, the pencil business of the palace treasury will naturally start again. At that time, I will ask the palace treasury to make 2 baskets for you to carry. 1 basket for you to write until you die, and the other basket for you to play on the street. The pencil glided across the snow-white paper like the toes of a beautiful woman dancing on smooth ice. Occasionally, it scraped up a few traces of ice and snow. Deng Ziyu knew that the commissioner was writing a secret letter, so he tactfully retreated. In the cold study, Fan Xian was the only one writing with the broken end of the pen. The mist that came out of his mouth appeared and disappeared on the paper. It looked very strange. The contents of the letter were also very strange. Although it was a secret letter from the Overwatch Council, the implications of the letter were too great. Furthermore, the writing of the pencil could be erased, so Fan Xian was not at ease. The language used was rather vague, and important sentences such as the time involved were all in code words. The letter was addressed to Wang Qinian, and it was about the Chui family. Because the Chui family had been persecuted in the capital, in order to help the second prince and Xinyang raise money, they had no choice but to move a large amount of smuggled goods to northern Qi. However, the channels there had never been opened, so there was a phenomenon of stockpiling goods. Currently, the goods that the Chui family had moved from Xinyang, as well as the warehouses in the north, accounted for about 1/6 of the annual production of the palace treasury. From this ratio, it could be seen how bold the eldest princess had become after all these years of controlling the palace treasury. She did not hesitate to seek personal gain. The current situation was the result of Fan Xian and Yin Bingyun spending a few months attacking the second prince and squeezing the Chui family dry. He had been waiting for this moment. He wanted to eat the other party clean in one bite, not even spitting out bone. At the end of the letter to Wang Qinian, he wrote, "It's time to eat." Fan Xian sat in his wheelchair, slightly tilting his head. He gently rubbed the area above the wound on his chest. It was wrapped in bandages, and it was a little itchy. After writing the letter, his hand was already numb from the cold. Suddenly, he began to miss the time in Danzhou when Cece would help him copy books every day. When he was copying books, this girl would place his hand in her embrace to warm it. His hand was plump, and it felt good to the touch. His heart fluttered, and he picked up the brush to write again. This second letter was addressed to Haidang Duo. However, when he wrote, his heart held a wanton heart, so the words in the letter were a little presumptuous and occasionally provocative. Ever since he had returned from northern Qi, his correspondence with Haidang had never stopped. He had long gotten used to having a pen pal in the north. After all, the two of them were powerful figures of the younger generation of two countries. It was necessary and beneficial for the future to maintain a smooth channel of communication. In the letter, he talked about the recent gossip in Qin Kingdom's capital. Of course, the Hanging Temple incident was also included. Although the assassination of the Qing emperor had shocked the world and northern Qi had long reported in detail, as the person involved, he told the story with much more vividness than in a book. He also said a few other things and secretly pointed out that he was preparing to take action against the Cui family. He wanted her and the unknown boy or girl emperor to cooperate with him. At the end of the letter, he copied a poem to prove that he was still as talented as usual. "I have come to repay a debt of gratitude, but it is not all profit and glory. The ancients died for their bosom friends, afraid that their bones would be frozen and buried in the courtyard. How can the people of the middle court miss me? Heavy coats and thick shoes float with beautiful tassels. I have heard that the north is even colder. I wonder how the people live." These were the last few lines of Sima Guang's bitter journey. Fan Xian read it over with some pride and rubbed his slightly stiff hands together. He felt that the poem he copied was too appropriate. Furthermore, the words between the lines were filled with bemoaning the state of the universe and pitying the fate of mankind. It would probably make Haidang think for a long time. It was not worth it to deceive a girl to death. This was exactly what he liked to do. After confirming that he had not missed anything, he sealed the letter and pressed the wax. Suddenly, his heart jumped. He felt as if his desire to pour out his heart had not been completely satisfied. Facing the normal-looking girl on the other end of the letter, who was shaking her head like a village girl, he felt that he was facing an old friend. For a moment, he sank into silence. Then, he spread out another piece of white paper and thought for a moment before raising his pen and writing, Duo, how are you?" The previous letter was considered official business. This one is just a casual chat. Today, Jingdou had its first snow in the 5th year of the Qin calendar. It came earlier than usual. I thought that the snow in Shangjing would be even heavier and the weather even colder. That day in your vegetable garden, I saw a few winter sweet at the corner of the fence. I wonder if those winter sweet blossoms have bloomed and moisturized the monotonous appearance of the white snow. How are the ducks you raise? Be careful, don't freeze to death, my side is fine. Xiao Huang, Xiao He, and Xiao Bai are all raised in the country estates outside the capital. I heard that the workers there treat these 3 big fat cats like their ancestors. How could there be any problems raising them? Everything is fine for me. I eat and sleep, sleep and eat. My house is quiet. These 2 days, my sister has been busy in the Imperial Academy of Medicine. I heard that she has become a rare sight in the capital. Warner went back to Lin Manor today. That cute brother-in-law of mine has been neglected recently, and his temper is a little bad. I wonder what you're doing at this time? Fan Xian wrote casually, as carelessly as if he were speaking. He simply wrote whatever came to mind. Right, that student of mine, surname Sure, opened a brothel. Business is good, and the food is very exquisite. If one day you travel to the Qin Kingdom, I will accompany you. I suddenly remember the name of that restaurant in Shangjing. I have forgotten the name of that restaurant, but I do remember that the wine was good that day. I said a lot of nonsense to you, but I don't know how much you remember. Speaking of which, I have read your previous letters a few times. I can't bear to read them. You are saintess. Don't learn the style of those noble young ladies. They always like to put poems in their letters. Although I have the fake title of immortal poet, I have no interest in correcting essays. Last time, you said C. Lily was doing well. Let's not talk about this in the future. I've always held a grudge against her, and I don't know why, but I especially hate hearing news about her from you. Duo, come to the Qing Kingdom to play. My wife is also very curious about you. Also, by the way, can the martial arts of Tianyi Dao be taught to outsiders? Recently, I have suddenly become very interested in your training methods. This seemingly natural question revealed the shamelessness and treachery in the depths of Fan Xian's heart. The snow outside seems to be getting heavier. The young man outside is still chopping firewood. Young people are always hot-blooded. Although I'm still young, I don't know why, but my heart is showing signs of old age. Looking at the people around me, it's hard for me to be interested. I'm tired, bored. The wind and snow outside are howling, perhaps urging me to start writing. All right then, let's stop here. The stove in the room is too broken, and the temperature can't be raised. Although I still want to talk to you, I feel that there's no need to go against the coldness of God. Also, please help me take care of him. Thank you, and may he be well. Although the letter was natural, there was still a lot of useful information mixed in. He read the letter again and added a sentence at the end. Wang Qinian, if you dare to peek again, I'll ask Mutai's nephew to peek at your daughter bathing. Why is there one more than usual? Deng Ziyu opened his eyes wide and looked at Fan Xian. He counted the letters in his hand. There are 2 for Miss Haitang. Why are you asking so many questions? Fan Xian said. Same old routine. Escort her all the way to Shanjing. Deng Ziyu nodded and walked out of the room. He handed the sealed letters to the member of the Qinian unit who had been waiting outside. The man counted the letters in his hand and asked the same question. Why are there 2? Deng Ziyu looked at him, and the corner of his mouth twitched unsightly. He took a deep breath and said, Why are you asking so many questions? The 2 of them looked at each other and nodded. They stopped talking, thinking that the commissioner was using the Overwatch Council's top-secret mail route to send love letters. It was a bit extravagant. Fan Xian sat in his wheelchair and left the courtyard of Shunzheng Road. He got into the carriage and went to Lin Manor, ready to take Wan'er into Bao home. In the carriage, he suddenly asked, Is there something strange about the position of Minister of the Imperial College? Also, I have long since left Taichung Temple. Why am I promoted to Vice Minister of Taichung Temple? Deng Ziyu first explained, there are 2 Vice Ministers. Vice Minister Ren is the main one, and you are the deputy. But this is a nominal position, and you don't have to go there every day. The Minister of the Imperial College is in charge of 7 schools, and both of these positions are of the upper 4th rank. He reminded him, Sir, although you can no longer be a court official after taking over the position of commissioner, the court has not issued an edict to remove you from these 2 positions. This time, the emperor has given you these 2 nominal positions. Presumably, it is only to show that the emperor favors you, and there is no other meaning. Fan Xian shook his head. These 2 positions were the last 2 in the emperor's edict. At first, he did not think much of it, but the more he thought about it, the more he felt that something was wrong. The emperor was a man of deep thought, and he would never use an official position as a mere steam bun. These 2 positions, is there anything special about them? He frowned and tried to organize his words. After thinking for a long time, Deng Ziyu replied with some uncertainty, The position of vice minister is common, and there is nothing special about it. It is just that Taichung Temple is in charge of miscellaneous matters in the ancestral temple, and it is more convenient to enter the palace. The minister of the Imperial College has not appeared in recent years. After a few new policies, the positions have become a bit messy. He suddenly slapped his thigh and said happily, I remember now. In the past, the minister of the Imperial College had to enter the palace to give lectures to the princes, and he was the assistant of the Grand Tutor. Fan Xian was stunned, and his mouth opened wide. He was speechless for a long time. He finally understood why the emperor had arranged these 2 positions for him. Vice Minister of Taichung Temple and Minister of the Imperial College. Wouldn't that make him the teacher of the princes? More accurately, wouldn't he be responsible for disciplining the little bastard third prince? Thinking of this, he turned pale with fright and cursed. I don't have the time to enter the palace every day. Aren't we going to Jiangnan? How could you arrange such a terrible thing for me to do? With a creak, the carriage seemed to have been stopped by his scolding. The curtain was lifted slightly, and in the light snow, he saw that the front of the carriage was blocked by a eunuch and a few palace guards. Eunuch Yao looked at Fan Xian in the carriage, and his eyebrows trembled in fear. In a trembling voice, he said, "Sir, let me find a good one. Come with me quickly. The emperor has summoned you to the palace." 2 chapters behind schedule. I didn't control it well. To be continued. If you want to know what happened next, please go to www.cmfu.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 315. I woke up late today. Someone was having a birthday celebration at home, and I wasn't feeling well, so I woke up late. Eunuch Yao had gone to the Fan Manor first. He did not find Fan Xian in the manor. He didn't know where the commissioner, who was currently recovering, had run off to. Even the minister did not know. That special Lady Fan Jr. was also not in the manor. He could not find anyone to ask about Fan Xian's whereabouts. But the emperor was still waiting in the palace. Eunuch Yao was worried sick. After finding out that Lady Fan had returned to Lin Manor, he led the guards in that direction. Coincidentally, they bumped into this carriage at the intersection. If the guards hadn't recognized one of Fan Xian's attendants, they probably would have missed it. Seeing Eunuch Yao gasping for breath, Fan Xian sighed. I still have to go back to Lin Manor. Why am I being summoned now? The emperor had summoned him, and he had responded so calmly. Eunuch Yao was worried sick. He had never seen an official who didn't take the summons of the palace seriously. He had always been on good terms with Fan Manor, so he couldn't say much. He only said, "The emperor's edict has been out for a long time. If you go any later, I'm afraid the emperor won't be happy." Fan Xian grimaced. "Of course I have to go." He couldn't bear to see the old eunuch standing in the snow. He invited him into the carriage, and the group headed for the palace. He arranged for someone to go to Lin Manor to inform his wife. "Lao Yao, tell me the truth. What happened?" Fan Xian rested against the wall, his eyes narrowed. He didn't look at the head eunuch. Fan Manor had always fed the eunuchs well, so he didn't feel like handing over any more banknotes. Eunuch Yao didn't dare accept banknotes from Fan Manor anymore. He laughed. How would a servant know? You'll know when you go." Fan Xian shook his head and pretended to be angry. "You don't do things properly." He paused. "I need to ask about something." Eunuch Yao pricked up his ears. He looked around the carriage to make sure there was no one else around. He lowered his voice. "Sir, what is it?" "I'll tell you anything I dare to say. Last time in the Hanging Temple, what happened to the eunuchs?" Fan Xian frowned. Eunuch Yao shuddered. After a slight pause, he raised his palm and placed it flat against his throat, making a cut. Fan Xian's expression did not change, but no one knew what he was thinking. He knew that this was the inevitable result. There was an assassin among the eunuchs, so the people present naturally could not escape death. He was afraid that the palace would have to purge a large number of them. "Where is old Dai?" "No." Eunuch Yao sighed and said, "He is an old man. The emperor can trust him. However, he has been implicated and can no longer stay in Taiji Palace." Thinking about how the imperial censorate reported on the matter of his good-for-nothing nephew 2 months ago, his life in the palace was very difficult. Later, the emperor, with great difficulty, gave Lady Shu face and promoted him to use again. He glanced at Fan Xian. Fan Xian didn't say anything. Eunuch Yao did not know just how deep the fate of banknotes between Fan Xian and Eunuch Dai was. Who would have thought that there would be another assassination attempt? Old Dai's luck can be considered to be extremely bad. As a matter of fact, he's been stripped of all his duties, and he's been flogged a dozen times. He's been sent to the treasurer's office. Such an old man, doing hard labor in this cold weather. Eunuch Yao and Eunuch Dai had entered the palace the same year. Although there was usually conflict between them, seeing the other person collapse at this moment, he couldn't help but feel a bit sad. He rubbed his sleeve at the corner of his eyes. Old Dai, endure for a few days, and wait for the emperor's anger to subside. It's good enough that I can keep my old life. Fan Xian shook his head and then asked, "Then, who is on duty in Taiji Palace now?" "Hongzhu." Eunuch Yao looked at Fan Xian's confused face and explained in a small voice, "A young brat. This year, he started running the path of Taiji Palace and being on duty. The emperor likes him for being efficient and efficient. The matter of issuing edicts is also given to that." "Hongzhu?" Fan Xian asked curiously. Eunuch Yao shook his head and said, "What right does he have?" The carriage had just passed Zinjiku when it was called to a stop by Eunuch Yao. Deng Ziyu was a bit dissatisfied. After all, the square in front of the palace was very wide. In this snowy winter, to have the commissioner, who had not yet recovered, sit in a wheelchair was truly too much. They weren't afraid of him freezing. "Officials, there's nothing we can do," Eunuch Yao said with grievance. Feeling wronged, Eunuch Yao said, "After what happened last time, the imperial army was reorganized. Now, these soldiers are all staring at everyone like wolves. Looking at the situation, they want to scare away everyone who enters the palace." Fan Xian listened for a bit and then said, "Don't make things difficult for Eunuch Yao. Let's get off." Deng Ziyu glanced angrily at the palace doors. He carried Fan Xian off the carriage and placed him on the wheelchair. He quickly opened the large black cloth umbrella and covered the commissioner's head. Behind him, there were already Overwatch Council officials pushing the umbrella. Snowflakes hit the black umbrella and made a slight sound. Eunuch Yao didn't have such good luck. He used his hand to cover his head and rushed toward the palace doors with a few guards beside him. Fan Xian's entire body was shrunk into the large cloak to hide from the cold wind blowing toward his face. Half his face was covered by the fur collar. He still felt a chill seeping into his clothes. The light above his head was dim, and the sound of snow falling was mournful. The imperial soldiers outside the palace doors gave Eunuch Yao the procedures and looked in shock at the group of people slowly walking in the middle of the square. In the wind and snow, the group of cold-faced, plain-clothed officials was pushing a wheelchair. There was only a black umbrella on the wheelchair that firmly blocked the snowflakes falling from the sky. Not a speck of snow fell on the person in the wheelchair. "The director wasn't summoned into the palace today?" the captain of the Imperial Army asked in surprise. "It's Commissioner Fan." Everyone was startled. The captain of the Imperial Army quickly led a group of people to welcome them. They helped the person in the wheelchair block the wind and snow outside and brought this group of people to the palace doors. After a slight inspection, they were allowed to enter the palace. The northern wind blew, and the snowflakes floated. Deng Ziyu pushed the wheelchair and walked through the long side path beside the main hall. As the color of the palace walls grew darker and darker, he finally stopped in front of the door on the right side of the palace wall. A eunuch had long opened a large plain umbrella and securely covered Fan Xian's head. Surrounded by people, he carefully led the young, injured person into the back palace. Deng Ziyu stood outside the door of the back palace and watched the commissioner move further and further away under the escort of the eunuchs. Although his expression was calm, no one knew what he was thinking in his heart. A snowflake floated down and landed on the corner of his eye, making him narrow his eyes. Not in the royal study? Fan Xian furrowed his brows and temporarily ignored the cold wind blowing toward his face. He asked Eunuch Yao beside him. Earlier, there had been news that the emperor had long waited for Commissioner Fan and had already lost his temper. The young eunuchs received Fan Xian and did not dare to be slow. It was as if their feet were on flaming wheels as they sprinted toward the depths of the palace. The wheelchair they pushed creaked, and the eunuch holding the large plain umbrella swayed left and right. If it were not for the fact that the terrain in the palace was flat, this mad dash would have long torn open Fan Xian's wound. Eunuch Yao ran until he was out of breath. He replied, in the bedroom." Fan Xian's heart was slightly surprised. His expression was not very good. Eunuch Yao watched and only remembered that this young official was still injured. The emperor could not wait, but if he allowed the commissioner's injury to worsen, he would not have a good time either. Only then did he quickly have everyone slow down. He scolded Fan Xian in the face and turned his face to the side in an attempt to curry favor. Sir Fan Jr., are you all right? Fancy nodded and said, not that expensive. In a moment, everyone had arrived at a place in the palace garden. It was not the bedroom where the Empress was, but where Yi Pin was. Eunuch Yao hurried forward and went inside to report. Not long after, someone came to receive Fan Xian. Today, the emperor was wearing a set of casual clothes and was sitting on a warm couch, talking casually with Yi Pin. The third prince was sitting obediently to the side, copying something. Seeing the eunuchs push Fan Xian in, he stopped talking and calmly turned his head to look at Fan Xian. You're injured. Why aren't you staying in the manor to recover? Why are you running around? An emperor seemed to be reprimanding a young official, but he was actually concerned about him. Logically speaking, the official should be grateful to him. Fan Xian laughed coldly to himself. If he really cared about him, why would he wait 17 years to show this? If he really cared about his injury, why was he in such a hurry to summon him into the palace? But his face was still slightly moved. He calmly replied, Your Majesty, I've almost recovered. That's why I sneaked out for a stroll. I was just about to go to the Lin Manor to pick up Wan'er. Wan'er returned to the Lin Manor? There's no one in the manor, except for that idiot. The emperor didn't seem to like associating his niece with the Lin Manor. He looked a little unhappy. Yi Pin peeked at the emperor's expression and laughed foolishly. She changed the subject. Fan Xian, you haven't recovered from your injury, yet you're running around. Aren't you afraid Minister Fan will beat you? The emperor was a little surprised. He immediately laughed. Fan Jian, how could I bear to? Although it was a joke, there was another meaning behind it. Fan Xian shivered slightly. He piled a smile on his face and didn't respond. The emperor glanced at the third prince, who was copying a book to the side. He said to Fan Xian, A few days ago, you organized a few books of classics at the Imperial College. I had Chengping study them these days. The tutor thought they were too deep. What do you think? Chengping, go see the commissioner. The third prince's surname was Li, and his name was Chengping. According to the customs of the kingdom of Qing, princes were very respectful to their officials. The emperor's order was not surprising. The third prince quickly put down his brush and carefully walked in front of the wheelchair. He bowed to Fan Xian. How can I do this? Fan Xian sat in the wheelchair, unable to avoid it. You are now the Minister of Education of the Imperial College. This is part of your duty, the emperor said calmly, as if he was talking about something normal. Yi Pin could tell that the emperor wanted Fan Xian to be the third prince's teacher. Thinking of Fan Xian's reputation in literature and martial arts, as well as his influence in court politics, Yi Pin couldn't help but smile. The more she looked at Fan Xian, the more she liked him. The emperor saw her expression and couldn't help but laugh. Look at how happy you are. The reason Yi Pin was favored was because, at least on the surface, she didn't hide her thoughts. When she was happy, she was happy. Hearing the emperor's teasing, she didn't panic. She laughed and said, Thank you, Your Majesty, for finding a good teacher for paying her. Fan Xian listened to the two elders talk to themselves. He felt bitter in his heart. He wondered why no one had asked for his opinion on this matter. The third prince came over holding a scroll. Fan Xian took it and glanced at it. He raised his head and reported, Master Zhuang's knowledge of the classics is excellent. The Grand Tutor thinks that it is reasonable for him to have a deeper understanding. However, these are only introductory things. It is not a problem for the third prince to study them in advance. The ruler and official exchanged a few more casual words. Fan Xian responded carefully, but he knew that the emperor would certainly have something to say to him. As expected, after drinking a bowl of hot soup, the emperor opened his mouth in a seemingly casual manner. The snow outside has stopped. Chu Xue, Ying Shi, Fan Xian, accompany me to the garden for a stroll. Yes, Your Majesty. The emperor stood. Yi Pin smiled slightly and placed a large red embroidered fox fur robe on his body. By the time they left Shufeng Palace, where Yi Pin lived, the snow had already stopped. The ground of the royal palace was clear and wet, but there was no accumulated snow. There were only a few traces of snow on the winter trees in the garden. The sky was gray and white. The red walls, yellow eaves, snow branches, and green bricks were very beautiful. There was not a trace of impurities in the air. It was unusually fresh. The emperor walked in front with a large cloak draped over his shoulders. A young eunuch pushed Fan Xian silently behind him. Along the way, the eunuchs and serving girls wearing cotton robes stayed far away. Those they met on the side of the road leaned to the side and didn't speak. There is no need to kneel when seeing me, snow, or rain. Seeming to guess what Fan Xian was thinking, the emperor quietly said, "This is a rule I set after I ascended the throne. Kneeling here and there every day, don't they find it annoying? If their clothes get dirty and torn, don't they need silver from the palace treasury to buy them?" Fan Xian sat in the wheelchair and quietly loosened a cloth button on his collar. After the snow and wind had stopped, he felt a little hot. Hearing the emperor's words, he knew that the topic was going to turn toward the palace treasury, but he shamelessly refused to follow up. Seeming angry at Fan Xian's silence, the emperor coldly asked, "Where is the second son of the Fan family now?" At this time, they had already arrived at a garden in the most secluded part of the palace. In front of them was a small lake. On the lake was a stone bridge that led to the pavilion in the center. There was some residual snow on the pavilion, but it was difficult to hide the black stone's austere aura. To be continued. If you want to know what happened next, please log on to www.cmfu.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support original reading. Chapter 316. The light snow had just stopped, and the cold air in the palace accumulated. The might of heaven was indeed difficult to withstand. However, Fan Xian sat in the wheelchair and felt very warm. The high-collared cloak he wore blocked the wind and snow, and he even felt a little hot. As for the emperor's questions, he had long been mentally prepared. He had never expected his family to secretly transport Fan Xian out of the capital and hide it from many people. "I just received a letter the day before yesterday. He has already settled down in Shanjing." Fan Xian glanced at the young eunuch behind him, intentionally or unintentionally. The emperor was in the mood to travel in front of him, so he did not notice the exchange of glances between the two people behind him. The young eunuch was Hongzhu. He looked at Commissioner Fan's smiling gaze. For some reason, his heart suddenly chilled and a glimmer of fear grew in him. Hongzhu knew that this commissioner was warning him that some words could not be passed into other people's ears. This young eunuch had been at the emperor's side recently and deeply understood that a ruler should maintain a silent attitude. He quickly lowered his head, not daring to meet Fan Xian's gaze. Hongzhu also wanted to climb up the mountain that was Fan Xian. How would he dare to go around announcing things that were not good for the Fan family? "You just said it like that." The emperor walked toward the other side of the lake as he lightly said, "I originally thought that although there are many things that the people under heaven know, some superficial effort still has to be done." Fan Xian lowered his head and rotated his neck, letting his cheeks rub against the soft fur on his collar. "Your Majesty is asked, and I dare not speak a word of falsehood." The emperor suddenly stopped walking. The young eunuch quickly pulled on Fan Xian's wheelchair, not daring to sit next to the emperor. Fan Xian didn't sit firmly and furrowed his brows. "You don't tell lies to me, but you dare to brazenly lie to the people under heaven?" The emperor turned his head and looked at Fan Xian with a not-quite-there smile. The few wrinkles at the corners of his eyes revealed a slight smile, but also a hint of questioning. Fan Xian raised his head and looked directly into the emperor's eyes with a bit of impoliteness. "There are many foolish people under heaven. I'm only loyal to the emperor, not to the common people." But someone once said, the emperor's gaze suddenly became a bit strange. "The people are most important, the state comes second, and the ruler is light." Nonsense. I don't know who is so daring. Fan Xian frowned slightly. Of course, he knew who would be so daring. The original creator was Mencius, and the plagiarist was his mother. "The Ministry of Justice is still searching for your brother." The emperor laughed and turned around to continue walking forward. "Are you not afraid that I will punish you?" Hongzhu pushed the wheelchair and followed. Fan Xian listened to the squeaking of the wheels and felt a headache coming. He shook his head and said, The emperor is wise and will certainly understand my difficulties. Difficulties? The emperor laughed coldly. I'm afraid that it is only now that the second prince feels that he has difficulties that he cannot voice out. Right? This subject is guilty. Fan Xian knew that at this moment, he should pretend to be slightly frightened, like those officials who were close to the emperor in Qing palace dramas. But he knew that it was the emperor's own idea to bring the second prince down from his throne. He was just a knife. Moreover, in the heart of the emperor, he was not a simple official. After all, that relationship was at work. Thus, he did not feel a glimmer of fear or nervousness. So, no matter how much he put on his acting, it was still superficial and a bit exaggerated. He dragged out the words, "This subject is guilty," a bit too long. The sense of drama was too strong. The emperor lowered his voice and scolded. "Even if you're acting, you don't know how to be more serious." Fan Xian replied with a pained expression, "This subject is guilty." Repeating it over and over meant that the subject was guilty and the subject was guilty. Fortunately, the three of them had already stepped onto the wooden bridge in the middle of the lake and temporarily stopped talking. Although Jingdo was already very cold, it was the first snow, so the lake water was certainly not cold enough to freeze. It was still green under the bridge, rippling coldly. Although the wooden bridge was built smoothly and sturdily, the wheelchair still felt a bit unsteady on it. Fan Xian's hands gripped the handles of the wheelchair tightly. His eyes stared at the gaps between the wooden bridge, thinking that if the eunuch behind him suddenly turned into an assassin, he would be in trouble. In front of them, the eunuchs and serving girls who had come to clean and decorate the pavilion bowed from a distance and then disappeared without a trace. They did not dare to stay by his side. The emperor sat on a cushioned stone bench and used his gaze to indicate for Fan Xian to bring himself a cup of hot tea to drink. He used 2 fingers to pick up a pine nut and slowly peel it. The eunuch, Hong Zhu, tactfully retreated to the side of the pavilion. One reason was to keep watch, and the other was to be ready at any time for any orders from his masters in the pavilion. "How is it?" the emperor asked. Fan Xian seemed to have been scalded by the tea in his cup. He furrowed his brows and immediately replied, "Your Majesty, are you referring to my injury or—" "The latter," Fan Xian replied very directly. "We have already prepared to act. The council order has already been sent down. This matter has not gone through the council, so it shouldn't attract too much attention." The emperor nodded. Fan Xian continued to explain the details. Currently, all of the goods within the borders should be able to be intercepted. However, I'm afraid that if the northern Qi people get wind of it, they will also make a lot of money from it. After all, the Cui family has stockpiled a lot of goods in the north. In these words, he hid a very important piece of information. Even if you beat him to death, he would not tell the emperor that this was his plan to split the spoils with the northern Qi emperor. There are 3 routes to the north. Currently, the 4th Bureau has already begun to control them. As for the people in the palace treasury, because they have been with the people on that side for too long, they are not at ease. For now, they have not been used. He furrowed his brows and explained Yin Bingyun's plan in great detail. However, before he finished, the emperor had already waved his hand and said, "I don't want the details, I only want the results." Fan Xian paused and then said, "Please rest assured, Your Majesty. At the latest, within a year, we should be able to recover most of the palace treasury's income." The emperor coldly shook his head. For the palace treasury to return to its former glory is an impossible matter. I think you understand the reason. Fan Xian lowered his head. The emperor asked, "Let me ask you, why are you so certain that I will support you acting against the second prince and the eldest princess?" "Because the court needs silver." After a moment of silence, the emperor grunted through his nose and said, "If the court wants to do things and expand the borders, they need silver. These years, Yunrui has emptied the palace treasury too much. I cannot stand it anymore, so I wanted you to take over this mess. You did not disappoint me. First, you had the courage to take over. Secondly, you acted ruthlessly enough and did not fear the other party's identity. This is what I like about you. Thank you, Your Majesty, for your appreciation." Fan Xian could only thank the emperor because the matter involved the eldest princess. After all, she was his mother-in-law, so he could not rashly comment. The emperor picked up a pine nut and put to his lips. He slowly savored the fragrance. Outside the pavilion, the wind had stopped and the snow had disappeared. There was a slight chill in the silence. Yi Zhong has returned at Sangzhou. I have made Prince he the commander of the imperial army. I heard that there's a lot of discussion in the capital. Did you hear anything? The emperor seemed to ask very casually. Fan Xian smiled bitterly and replied, "Of course, discussion is unavoidable. After all, it does not seem to conform to old practice." Your opinion? Fan Xian was shocked. How could he have the right to give his opinion on such a matter? He quickly said, "Your Majesty is far-sighted and calm. I dare not speak rashly." "Speak. I forgive you of your crimes." The emperor did not look at Fan Xian's delicate face. He only focused his gaze on the winter tree in the palace garden. Fan Xian calmed down. He knew that talking to the emperor was a difficult matter. Wei Xiaobao had faked 90% of the truth, but in the end, he had still been caught by Kangxi. And the things he had done in secret, sneaking into the palace, the agreement with Northern Qi, the conversation with Xiao In, these were all hidden from the emperor in front of him. If it came to light, who knew what would happen to him? But the emperor in front of him was truly unfathomable. If Fan Xian did not have that natural advantage, he would not dare to play with him. The so-called advantage was that he knew the true relationship between him and the emperor did not know that he knew this. Thus, Fan Xian could play the role of a loyal official. The more apologetic the emperor felt towards him, the more benefits he could obtain. The great prince does not wish to stay in the capital, Fan Xian said directly. And for a prince to be demoted to a lower rank is against the rules. Most importantly, the palace is the heart of the kingdom of Qing. We must be careful. His words were very direct and even a little out of line. But the emperor did not have much of a reaction. He only coldly said, "He does not wish to? 9 out of 10 things do not go one's way. He does not wish to stay in the capital. Do you think he can bear to see me, his father, guard the capital alone? Fan Xian, as a lobbyist, you're not very good." Fan Xian looked embarrassed. He knew that the great prince's visit to Fan Manor had not been hidden from the emperor. Don't make trouble with the second prince. If he calms down, the emperor closed his eyes and put an end to what had happened in the capital. Yes, Fan Xian nodded. He had already achieved his goal. What more was there to make trouble for? You have done a great service in the Hanging Temple incident, the emperor suddenly said. But as the commissioner of the Overwatch Council, you allowed an assassin to sneak into the capital. Before it happened, the Second Bureau did not find out anything. This is your dereliction of duty. The two cancel each other out, so I can only reward you with those useless things. Do not feel resentful. I would not dare, Fan Xian replied seriously. It was a failure on my part. As for the injury, it was because I was not skilled enough. That was why I was injured by the white-clothed swordsman. The emperor suddenly became interested and asked, "That swordsman, we have not found out who he is. You have fought with him. Can you guess anything?" Outside the pavilion, a cold wind suddenly rose. Fan Xian's back suddenly became numb. A drop of sweat rolled down his neck and dripped down the inside of his undershirt. He did not know what the emperor's real purpose was, but he felt that if he was not careful, he would lose everything. The white-clothed swordsman was the shadow. No matter what reason Qin Pingping had for setting up this trap, he would not tell the emperor the truth before he told Fan Xian. But if the emperor vaguely guessed this, how should he answer? If he said he did not know, would it shake the position he had worked so hard to establish in the emperor's heart? It was only a moment of shock, but Fan Xian concealed it well. "Your Majesty, didn't you say that the white-clothed swordsman was Sigu Jian's younger brother?" The emperor laughed coldly. Back in the day, when Dongyi was in chaos, Sigu Jian's sword was merciless. He killed who knows how many of his own family members. It is said that one of his brothers escaped. I guessed it. That day on the tall building, that brilliant sword strike. If it were not for Sigu Jian's sword will, I'm afraid my eyes would have been blinded. Fan Xian's heart was slightly at ease. He knew he had gambled correctly. He smiled and said, "It is a pity. If I could have had concrete evidence. Next year I would have used this excuse to send troops against Dongi. My injury would have been worth it." These words scratched the emperor's itch. The emperor liked this kind of shameless method the most. He smiled and said, after Siga Jian was cured by Fei Jie, he never acted like an idiot again. How would he admit to this? First, he did not admit that there was still a brother alive in this world. Then, he sent a letter of credence, expressing shock and sympathy for the assassination attempt on me. He expressed disbelief at the viciousness of the assassin. As the middle-aged man spoke, he found that no one responded to his rare humor. Turning his head, he found that Fan Xian was looking at him seriously. The eunuch outside the pavilion was hunched over, not daring to make a sound. Looking at this scene, he couldn't help but sigh in his heart. He thought that after all these years, there was indeed no one else who dared to cause trouble with him as impudent as her. The emperor's mood was a bit dim. Slowly, he opened his mouth and asked, "Fan Xian, that day upstairs, why did you save Ping'er first?" Fan Xian sat in his wheelchair and asked for forgiveness. After a long silence, he replied, "In the situation at that time, if I had come to your majesty's side, I would only have been able to block the sword in front and not the knife behind me. The third prince was in danger." "Oh." The emperor smiled self-mockingly. "Is my life not as valuable as Ping'er's?" Fan Xian smiled bitterly and once again asked for forgiveness. "I deserve to die. At the time, the situation was tense, and I didn't react in time. By the time you rushed in front of me, the initiative had already been lost. Were you not afraid of death?" Fan Xian thought for a moment, and then finally said these treasonous words. He looked into the emperor's calm eyes and said bitterly, "At the time, I was thinking that if I could block that sword with my little life, it would be great. If I couldn't, to be able to go with your majesty to another world to see the scenery, that could be considered a great honor." The emperor paused slightly and then laughed loudly. His laughter shook the sky and traveled far outside the pavilion. The eunuchs and serving girls waiting in the corner of the garden in the royal palace heard the emperor's rare happy laughter and couldn't help but look at each other. They didn't know what joke Commissioner Fan had told to make the emperor so happy. The emperor stopped laughing. The more he looked at the familiar expression between Fan Xian's brows, the more comforted he felt. Slowing his voice, he said, "On this trip to Jiangnan, be careful. Don't rush to the front for everything. I heard you were also as noisy in the north. You're a proper official, yet you don't know how to cherish your life." Fan Xian felt slightly embarrassed. He knew the emperor's words were reasonable. Of the officials of a country, how many would be as accustomed to taking risks as he was in the past? However, deep in his bones, he liked to travel alone. When all was said and done, it was because he didn't trust others. However, there were still a few months until the Jiangnan trip. The emperor's parting edict seemed to have come a bit too early. "Your Majesty," Fan Xian thought of an important matter and said uneasily, "What you said earlier at Yi Pin's place, was it a naughty joke?" The emperor glared at him and said coldly, "An emperor does not joke." Fan Xian was terrified. "I'm not old and have little prestige. How can I be the teacher of a prince?" The emperor smiled and looked at him. "I heard, when you were in Shangjing in northern Qi, that little emperor respected you very much. As for prestige, even Zhuang Mohan praised you. Why can't I be the teacher? The northern Qi grand tutor is only a junior of Zhuang Mohan. If it wasn't for the fact that you're truly too young, I would have directly issued an edict for you to enter the palace to lecture. Who would dare to say anything?" But Fan Xian somewhat regretted the illustrious reputation he had created out of his own vanity. Vexed, he said, "But I'm going to Jiangnan next spring. It would not be good to delay the third prince's studies." The emperor waved his hand. "Take Ping'er with you. I have already spoken with the Empress Dowager." Fan Xian opened his mouth wide and didn't say anything for a long time. "Do well," the emperor said with a calm expression. "After the Jiangnan matter, stay in the capital for another 2 years. I will let you enter the hall of governmental affairs." He stared into Fan Xian's eyes and said in a gentle tone, "I do think highly of you." After a moment of silence, Fan Xian nodded his head without any pretense. He knew that the conversation was over, so he prepared to take his leave and go home. Unexpectedly, the emperor waved his hand again and lightly said, "Today is the beginning of winter. There is a banquet in the palace. You can eat in the palace. I have already sent someone to your home to pick up water." Fan Xian's heart jumped again. He didn't know what this meant or if it didn't explain anything. "The Empress Dowager wants to see you," the emperor said. He coughed again to cover it up. "She wants to see what exactly Wanner's husband looks like." The emperor sat in the royal carriage and left. The pavilion quieted down. Only Fan Xian and the little eunuch responsible for pushing the wheelchair remained. Fan Xian watched the direction the emperor left in. A cold self-mockery flashed through his eyes. Although it had happened suddenly, he still had some hope that the middle-aged man would let him see that painting. Perhaps the middle-aged man would say something to him? Who would have thought that in the end, it would still be this kind of benevolent and loyal subject? There was a faint disappointment in his heart. The royal family had always been heartless. He knew this, and he had never seen the middle-aged man as his father. The so-called disappointment was actually just disappointment for that woman called Yi Qingmei. Looking at the emperor's attitude toward him, he knew that he was a fickle person. At least, toward his mother, he did not have a heart of gratitude or enough remembrance. In other words, even if the emperor now had complete trust in him, even if he already saw him as his closest official, he was still only an official. If one day his identity was revealed, he would no longer be a loyal official who protected the emperor, and it would involve the ownership of that chair. Fan Xian smiled coldly in his heart. He had no interest in being the emperor. Being the commissioner of the Overwatch Council was an interest he had raised since he was young. Whether or not he wanted to be was his problem. Whether or not the middle-aged man would let him stand in the order was a problem of morality. F***CK. I don't want to talk about you. After venting his anger by cursing the emperor's mother, Fan Xian took a deep breath. He knew that his gloominess was indeed unreasonable. Because Lady Ning was a Dongi prisoner of war, the great prince had been automatically stripped of his right to inherit the throne by many people. Furthermore, he was a character who could not see the light of day. Furthermore, there must have been some loose ends left in his mother's strange death, which was why the emperor did not dare to acknowledge him until now. What confused Fan Xian was that, from the day he had guessed his identity, he had given up on the idea. Why did he suddenly care so much about it today? With a soft drip, a drop of snow water dripped down from the eaves of the pavilion and softly hit the stone steps. The sound startled Fan Xian. He raised his eyes to gaze at the early winter scenery outside the pavilion and sighed. He thought to himself that perhaps it was because the environment in the palace was too oppressive that it made him think about those boring things that he did not need to think about. "Commissioner, sir, there is still some time for dinner. The emperor has instructed that you can wander as you please," the young eunuch Hong Zhu said with his head lowered, but his voice trembled. He could wander as he pleased in the rear palace? He was not recuperating in the plum garden, so it was better not to break any taboos. Fan Xian shook his head. "I'll just watch from his pavilion." He noticed the young eunuch's voice and narrowed his eyes. They swept over the young eunuch's body like two small knives. This gaze made the young eunuch nervous. Cold, yes. Sweating, yes. The corners of Fan Xian's lips twitched, and he smiled. "Don't be afraid. Since the emperor is at ease letting you listen here, naturally, he trusts you." That was true. The conversation between the emperor and Fan Xian in the pavilion seemed like a normal family affair, but the information hidden within was very rich. For the first time, Hong Zhu learned that the battle between the Overwatch Council and the Second Prince, as well as the matter of the palace treasury, had been tacitly approved by the emperor. Commissioner Fan was incomparably intelligent and had secretly agreed with the emperor's actions. And it seemed that Commissioner Fan was about to make some big move again. If these things got out of the palace, it would probably cause a huge uproar. "I'm not afraid," Hong Zhu replied pitifully. Fan Xian looked at the young eunuch's pitted face and suddenly asked curiously, "Eunuchs also have pimples?" "Pimples?" Hong Zhu was slightly startled and immediately understood what he meant. Somewhat annoyed, he replied, "I'm not sure either." It was quiet outside the pavilion. In the distance, there were palace maids moving about. All around, the cold lake was cold and awe-inspiring. There was a gentle breeze coming from the lake, entering the pavilion and circling around his body, slightly calming the irritation in his heart. Fan Xian smiled. "You are Hongzhu?" Recommending the urban lifestyle novel Snake and Scorpion. The author is richly carved. It tells the story of a strong woman in the business world. Everyone is welcome to collect, click, and recommend. The link is here, http mmconfu. Comshowbook. ASP. BL_ID equals 151,321. Chapter 3:17. Hongzhu had not thought that even the commissioner would know his name. His face immediately felt a bit of glory. He laughed and replied, "Yes, it must be difficult for the commissioner to know my name. His Majesty's close attendant is a vital point." Fan Xian said, "I'm the commissioner of the Overwatch Council. Of course, I have to be careful. Furthermore, a few days ago, an assassin appeared among the young eunuchs in Taiji Palace." Hongzhu was startled and didn't dare reply. Fan Xian warmly said, "Since the emperor trusts you, then I trust you as well. Right? I heard that old Dai is currently doing hard labor?" Hongzhu glanced at him and said probingly, "Yes, it's quite tragic." "Yes." Fan Xian nodded. "I'm not afraid of any taboos. I've had dealings with old Dai before, and he's a good person. Please help me take care of him in the palace." Hongzhu was overjoyed. A month ago, he had been counting on being able to use eunuch Dai to make connections with this young official. Since the other party had said so, then there was hope. He quickly and respectfully replied, "How could I not follow your orders?" Fan Xian smiled slightly and said, "Sorry to trouble you. If there are any difficulties in the family in the future, just let me know." He didn't need to say it too clearly. The other party should know to contact him through Igui Pin. When he returned to the Shufang Palace where Igui Pin lived, it was a great coincidence that the great princess of Northern Qi, who had not had the opportunity to see him since September, had also returned from the Empress Dowager's palace. Before the great princess's marriage, she had been arranged to live in this palace. She looked at Fan Xian in the wheelchair and was slightly surprised. However, it was not convenient for the two of them to say anything, so they bowed slightly and retreated to the back. Igui Pin glanced at Fan Xian. "You came all the way back from the north. Why do you feel so unfamiliar?" Fan Xian did not forget to gather allies and plant spies. How could he let go of someone as important as the great princess? However, in front of everyone, he had to pretend to be unfamiliar with her. He replied, "Our identities are different. Besides, men and women are different." Igui Pin teased, "Child, you're even more handsome than a great beauty. I'm not afraid of you harming others, but I'm afraid that others will provoke you." Fan Xian jumped in fright and said, "Aunt, don't talk nonsense." Turning his head, he saw that the third prince was still calmly copying books and pretending to be obedient. For some reason, he felt angry. Shaking his head, he asked, "Did the Empress Dowager really allow this?" There was a tone of disbelief in his voice. Igui Pin looked at him and nodded. Smiling, she said, "I only heard the Emperor's permission today. However, this is a good matter. Why would the great ancestor object?" Fan Xian smiled self-mockingly, thinking that the matter was not so simple. He thought for a while, and then said seriously, "If I go to Jiangnan, would you be willing to let Little Sand follow me? The people of Jiangnan are good, and the scenery is good. What is there to be reluctant about?" Igui Pin suddenly beckoned him closer. Fan Xian followed her words and moved closer. He was only a foot away from her, as if he wanted to smell the orchid scent this noble woman exhaled. Only then did he hear her lower her voice and say through gritted teeth, "Take him as far away from the palace as possible. It's best if you can drag it out for as many years as you can." Fan Xian was slightly startled. Only now did he know that Igui Pin had such a negative plan. He shook his head and said, "Blindly backing down is not a good thing. Besides, the Jiangnan Palace treasury doesn't need much effort. I'm just going to take a look. I can't always drag it out. Iguapin thought for a bit and found that this was indeed the case. She sighed with disappointment. These words are true. The emperor will not allow it. You're not always in Jingdo. Fan Xian thought for a bit and comfortingly said, after all, third son is still young. It's not worth worrying so early. Besides, the Empress Dowager is in the palace watching over these grandsons. They wouldn't dare to do anything too out of line. He paused and then said, after all, we're not the same as those other palaces. Shangshu Alley still has some strength to speak, and father won't retreat for a while. At the very least, there's still me, right? With these words, Iguapin finally relaxed. Given the current trend of development, Fan Xian's influence in court would only grow. The court and the palace were often two independent circles influenced by the two ministers. As long as there were people in court, she and Li Chengping, mother and son, would have a much easier time in the palace. Having spoken to this point, everyone had already made their point very clear. In the eyes of Iguapin, who still retained a bit of likable straightforwardness, for the sake of her child, the tighter she was tied to the Fan family, the better. Have third son come with me to Jiangnan, but there is one thing you have to promise me. Fan Xian glanced at the third prince, who was eavesdropping but couldn't hear anything. What is it? Seeing the seriousness in his words, Iguapin also became nervous. I don't really know how to be a teacher. As you know, those students that are sent out to the provinces are their good fortune after 10 years of hard work. Fan Xian said seriously. I can only teach your highness like a little brother. It's hard to avoid being disrespectful. Hearing the words, teach like a little brother, Iguapin beamed with joy. She had no idea of Fan Xi's wretched state in the north and nodded repeatedly. Fan Xian looked at her like he was looking at a fairy, wondering why she was so happy like she had won the lottery. Probingly, he said, maybe sometimes I will fight. You can do whatever you want with your feet. Iguapin said straightforwardly and said with a smile, as long as nothing bad happens to me, I'll let you do whatever you want. She then sighed and said, you don't know, the incident at that brothel a few days ago gave me a big fright. Normally, I only knew that he was on good terms with the second prince. Who would have thought that the second prince, that bastard, would actually urge Ping to do that? Ping is so young, what does he know? In the end, he was still used as a knife by others. Fortunately, you quickly suppressed this matter. Otherwise, who knows how angry the emperor would be? Fan Xian smiled silently, thinking that this son of yours was not a kind person. Although he was only 8, the things in his mind were complicated. He then heard Iguapin say in a low voice, teach him to be more obedient. Even if he becomes the useless King Jing, at least he can have a lifetime of peace. Fan Xian listened to these words and couldn't help feeling a bit emotional. In this world, only a mother was good. This line was indeed not wrong. A child without a mother was like a blade of grass. His own life experience also proved the truth of this line. It was still early before dinner time, and there was still no news from the Empress Dowager's palace. Fan Xian was happy to have the peace and quiet. He stayed in Shufang Palace and chatted idly with Iguapin. The two of them were relatives, so there were fewer taboos. Furthermore, in the entire Chili royal palace, it seemed that only Iguapin's palace still had some human touch. Servant greets Princess Chun. Following the crisp greetings of the serving girls in the outer room, Lin Wana rubbed her 2 small hands and walked in. Today, she was wearing a jade-colored layered dress and a large red silk jacket. On the cuffs of her sleeves, there were 2 strands of fox fur. It was furry and cute. Fan Xian sat in the wheelchair and stretched out his hands. Wana moved forward and placed her hand in his warm palm. Her movements were very natural. Fan Xian gently rubbed the girl's slightly cold hands and asked curiously, you came just like that? The colors were similar to red and green. However, the red was a bit more vivid, and the jadeite exuded nobility. It was much more pleasing to the eye when worn on Wanner's body. However, entering the palace to eat, one should always dress more gorgeously. Lin Wanner pouted and said, I waited for you at home for a long time, but no one came. Later, Su Wanmao called someone over to say something. Only then did I know you had been summoned into the palace. I brought the Bao back to the manor. Just as we reached the door, we were stopped by a eunuch. He can't let the second prince cause the two families to separate. Lin Wanner laughed and said, "You used to be the most famous person in Lu Jing River. Of course, you don't think this is a big deal." After saying this, she realized that it was inappropriate for a daughter-in-law to tease her father-in-law, so she laughed and covered it up. Fan Xian was worried about his sister, so he didn't make fun of her. His brows were full of helplessness. These days, Ruo had made a name for herself in the Imperial Academy of Medicine. He hoped that Haidang would be able to handle things well, or at least delay the marriage for a while. "Why did Uncle summon you into the palace?" Lin Wanner asked the question she really cared about. "I'm afraid it's not just about the third prince." Fan Xian quietly looked at his wife. Suddenly, he reached out his hand and gently stroked her smooth chin. He smiled and didn't say anything. Was she supposed to tell her that her dearest uncle had asked her dearest husband to use all his skills just to make her biological mother destitute? Fortunately, Yi Guipin and the others had already dressed up and came out. Fan Xian turned to look and saw Yi Guipin and the great princess of Northern Qi walk out hand in hand. The two women, with their jewelry, clothing, and makeup, shone brilliantly. Their features were like a painting, dignified and noble. He couldn't help but praise them in his heart. The so-called splendor of jewels was nothing more than this. The great princess looked at him and smiled. She walked out of the hall, shoulder to shoulder with Wan whom she already knew. The winter solstice was as big as the new year. On this day, everyone in the Qing kingdom rested. The court stopped, the army rested, the borders closed, and the merchants rested. It wasn't just the capital. Even Northern Qi, far away in the north, was peacefully living a happy life. According to the customs of the Qing kingdom, mutton was to be eaten on the winter solstice. In the streets and alleys of the private residences in Jingdo, countless strands of hot fog floated up from the spacious or cramped kitchens. They circled around the various pots 3 times and then found the only way out, drilling through the cracks between the windows. The hot fog carried the pungent smell of dried chili, the gamey smell of fresh mutton, the strange smell of medicinal herbs, and the sweet smell of carrots. The 4 scents mingled and were incomparably beautiful. They filled the streets and alleys of countless courtyards, making all who smelled them salivate. Inside Hongguang Palace, behind the table at the very end, Fan Xian stared with a pair of confused eyes. He looked at the mutton that had been cut into the shape of an ear with the tips of his chopsticks. He looked at the mushrooms and rare vegetables floating in the white soup in his bowl. He couldn't help but sigh in his heart. The mutton in the palace was indeed different from that of the common people. The workmanship was much more exquisite, but it also lacked the warmth of incense. Without tofu and carrots, how could he eat the mutton? The biggest problem was that the mutton was already warm. He couldn't burn his mouth and lips until they were numb. What would be the point of drinking it? So, he just barely finished the soup in his bowl and picked up some chopstick sauce to mix with the rice. He chewed slowly and carefully, delaying the time of this boring family feast. His eyes were focused on his nose was focused on his lips, and his lips held the tips of his chopsticks. He was incomparably focused, but the corners of his eyes didn't wander. He quietly listened to the conversation of the members of the royal family in the palace and didn't interrupt. He was as lonely as the wheelchair not far behind him. Hongguang Palace was the Empress Dowager's palace. It was the grandest building in the rear palace. Although it was much simpler than the wastrel royal palace in Shangjing in northern Qi, it was still magnificent and majestic. The candlelight was like the sun, making the furnishings and objects in the palace shine. The members of the royal family in the palace ate silently, not daring to look directly at the old woman at the very top, as well as the emperor and empress beside her. On the winter solstice, everyone had arrived, including King Jing's family of 3 and the second prince, who was under house arrest. However, When the second prince and Hongcheng saw Fan Xian enter, they were only slightly surprised. They didn't charge forward to kill him like a shrew. Fan Xian glanced at the old woman at the main table out of the corner of his eye. This was the first time he had seen the Empress Dowager. From the wrinkles on her face, it was as if he could still smell the old woman's methods and hard heart. Although the tiger was old, its ill might was still there. She sat at the very top. Even the usually impudent King Jing appeared much more well-behaved. He wasn't familiar with the people, but he was familiar with the palace. When he had played Thief Marshal Yi Liuxiang, he had walked through the palace twice and found the key in the secret compartment under the old woman's bed. Thinking of this matter, he quietly withdrew his gaze and silently ate the rice mixed with sauce. From above came a few feeble coughs from the old woman. Fan Xian lowered his head and didn't speak. Earlier, he had caught a glimpse of the Empress Dowager's expression and found that the corners of her lips were beginning to droop. He knew that this old woman didn't have many years left to live. "Chen girl, come sit beside me." The Empress Dowager looked at her granddaughter at the furthest table in the distance, and then at Fan Xian, whose face was hidden in the shadows. She called out, "Give me a massage." Wan rose warmly and left her seat. With a smile, she walked over and whispered something into the Empress Dowager's ear. She then glanced at Fan Xian, who was bitterly eating the rice with soy sauce. She guessed that she was trying to make the old woman happy and tell her a joke. As expected, the Empress Dowager laughed and laughingly scolded. "Looks like you fed him well in the Fan manor. He can't even eat in the palace anymore." Although her voice was low, it clearly reached everyone's ears. They all knew that she was talking about Fan Xian. Fan Xian's heart jumped, and a smile bloomed on his lips. It seemed that it wasn't a lie that Wan was the most favored in the palace. As long as the Empress Dowager and the Emperor liked her, her position in the palace would naturally rise. But he still felt a little nervous. Today was the first time he had seen the Empress Dowager. The old woman occasionally glanced at him, and it made him shiver. Logically speaking, a grandmother looking at a grandson shouldn't look at him like that. That look was very complicated. There was a glimmer of gratification, 2 parts pride, 3 parts doubt, and the remaining 4 parts vigilance and coldness. When the Empress Dowager spoke, everyone had already stopped eating. They were listening to what the old woman had to say at the winter solstice banquet. "Today, everyone has arrived. Last year, I was not feeling well, so I didn't have the gathering. Today, seeing the Prince Consort, I am very happy." The Empress Dowager said she was happy, but there was no expression on her face. She turned to the Emperor and said, "But it's not good for your sister to stay alone in Xinjiang. Her daughter and son-in-law are both in the capital. I don't like her living in the Li Palace all the time." Fan Xian laughed coldly in his heart. He knew that they had finally reached the main topic. The meaning was clear. If he, the Prince Consort, could attend the royal banquet, why couldn't the eldest princess? The Emperor's deep eyes flashed. "The weather is cold, and the roads are not easy to travel. When spring comes, let Yunrui come back." Hearing these words, the Empress Dowager nodded her head in satisfaction. Fan Xian noticed that the second prince's left sleeve trembled unnaturally. Presumably, this pitiful friend of his who had been punished by him knew that reinforcements were about to arrive in the capital, and his heart was unbearably excited. But why was the crown prince's expression a little strange? Fan Xian didn't pay much attention to what the Empress Dowager said after. The royal banquet was really boring. However, when he heard the Empress Dowager occasionally mention him, she purposely revealed a trace of coldness, which made the corners of his lips involuntarily reveal a trace of self-mockery. He had heard that when he was injured, the Empress Dowager had prayed for him, and that he had received the pearl from the Empress Dowager. He had thought that the old woman's heart had softened, and that his hard heart had also softened. Unexpectedly, looking at the situation, it was just a blind guess. Forget it. Let's see whose heart is harder. You people from the royal family are naturally cold-hearted. I'm a monster who's lived 2 lives, so my heart won't be soft either. At least it's harder than the mutton in the cold soup. Since the ruler was not the ruler, the official was not the official, the father was not the son, the ancestor was not the grandson. Did he need to be afraid of that groundless blood relationship? Although he was a poet who plagiarized, Fan Xian was, in the end, a literary person. He could not shake off that sour and proud character. In this cold and deserted Hongguang palace, he straightened his body and back. Although he had a smile on his face, he did not purposely try to curry favor with the Empress Dowager, nor would he shamelessly pretend to be a junior for the amusement of the old woman's grandchildren. For a moment, the conversation in Hongguang Palace seemed awkward and cold. Other than the Empress Dowager, the ladies and princes in the palace were all familiar with Fan Xian. They knew that this son-in-law was not a simple character. When it came to making people happy, that was the little trick he was best at. Thus, they didn't understand why Fan Xian didn't take advantage of the family banquet to curry favor with the Empress Dowager. The emperor did not think much of it. He thought that Fan Xian was angry at the fact that his mother-in-law was returning to the capital and had lost his composure. The Empress Dowager thought that this young man was naturally arrogant, and she disliked him even more. Seeing this, the Empress did not understand what Fan Xian wanted to do. A trace of doubt appeared in the corner of her eyes. Under the Empress Dowager's slightly angry gaze, Lady Ning drank her wine boldly. Concubine Shu took a small sip, and Igui Pin giggled foolishly to amuse the Empress Dowager, helping Fan Xian divert a few gazes. Among the others, the Great Prince was confused, the second prince was secretly amused, and the third prince was admiring him. The Crown Prince's mind wandered. Only King Jing's guess was a bit closer to the truth. He secretly shook his head, thinking that scholars really did tend to be a bit pedantic. Wan leaning against the Empress Dowager's side, looked at Fan Xian with some worry. In the cold night, snowflakes began to fall again. At the corner gate of the royal palace, Fan Xian sat in his wheelchair with his head slightly lowered. His expression was calm, as if he had nothing on his mind. Lin Wan was a bit worried. "Husband, are you all right?" "I'm fine." Fan Xian's head remained firmly lowered. "I was just pretending to be dephaging." The Tiger Guards and the Chinian unit had arrived. The husband and wife boarded the carriage, which headed for Fan Manor. In the carriage, Lin Wan asked curiously, "Who is dephaging?" "A man who has kept his head lowered all his life." Fan Xian laughed. "Let's not talk about him. Let's go home and eat some mutton. Father and the others should still be waiting." To be continued. If you want to know what happened next, please log on to www.cmfu.com. More chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 3:18. About 4,000 li to the northeast of Qing Kingdom's Jingdou, in the even more ancient and brilliant Shangjing, the snowfall was extremely heavy. Snowflakes as thick as goose feathers fell to the ground. The streets and alleys of Shangjing seemed to be covered with a layer of pure white wool carpet. However, the snow did not accumulate on the manors with heated stoves. The black eaves of the houses were exposed, and the two contrasted particularly beautiful. From the city gate, one could see the palace built against the mountain in the distance. The pure black eaves of the palace were a deeper shade than the black eaves of the houses. On the snowy cliffs of the mountain, layers of winter trees were covered in frost and snow. The waterfalls had gradually softened into icy creeks. The stone paths were slanted and lonely. The winter mountain and the palace blended harmoniously. After the summer passed, many things happened in northern Qi. The most shocking was naturally the assassination of the provost of the Discipline Commission, Shenzhong. Commander Shang Shanhu, who had galloped through the streets that night, was still under house arrest. The attitude of the court and the palace was clear. After Shenzhong's death, he was immediately charged with numerous crimes. The Shun family was destroyed, and only Lady Shun, whom the people of Shangjing were familiar with, had suddenly disappeared without a trace. Shenzhong's sudden death was a heavy blow to the embroidered uniform guards. The already weak Northern Qi Secret Service had been secretly dealt a blow by the young emperor. After losing a shrewd leader, they appeared even weaker. Even the Empress Dowager's voice had become much quieter. In the past few months, all the members of the Brocade Guard had been nervous. No one had come to take over the yamen, and no one knew how the court would deal with it. Fortunately, the court had finally issued a decree a few days ago. The son of Marquis Ningho, Wei Hua of the Honglu Temple, had officially taken over the position that Shun Zhong had vacated. In the rumors of Shangjing, the Empress Dowager had wanted Marquis Ningho to be the provost, but the young emperor had refused. Now that the decree had clearly stated that Marquis Ningho's son would take the position, it inevitably caused some discussion. No one knew whether or not the mother and son, who quarreled every day, had finally come to some kind of tacit understanding and compromise. Today, the Brocade Guard roused themselves, bringing out the fierceness and dominance of the past, and began to carry out a new mission. More than 100 Brocade Guards dressed in brown, official robes surrounded Xiushui Street, allowing the snow to fall on them. Xiushui Street was not simple. The shops on it all had deep backgrounds, especially the 7 shops in the middle. They were all royal merchants of Qing. The two countries were currently in a honeymoon period. Logically speaking, the Brocade Guard was in the midst of reorganizing themselves and should not have come to cause trouble. But the development of the situation exceeded everyone's expectations. The shopkeepers along the street stood up, rubbing their hands in the wind and watching nervously as the Brocade Guard took away the owner of the tavern. He was Sheng Huairan and was one of the head of the Qing Palace in Shangjing. Shopkeeper Yu of the glass shop leaned against the old door and said in a trembling voice, "How dare you arrest them?" The shop assistant said softly, "It was said that there was a large stockpile of goods in the south of the capital. There were no customs documents, not even tax receipts." The Brocade Guards followed that line to Shangjing and dug out this boss Sheng. The wind and snow blew against his face and circled around his body. It seemed to be even more translucent than the glass bottle behind shopkeeper Yu. He looked at the gradually retreating Brocade Guards with a worried expression. He was well aware of the matter of the palace treasury smuggling to the north. This was a business that the eldest princess had single-handedly carried out. However, Northern Qi had always tacitly agreed to it and enjoyed the benefits of low prices. Why had they suddenly acted today? In the beautiful imperial palace of Shangjing, the young emperor was lying on a warm blanket, one hand holding a pastry to his mouth, the other holding a book, reading it carefully and attentively. The new provost of the Discipline Commission, Wei Hua, carefully glanced at him and deliberated for a moment before summoning up the courage to interrupt the emperor's absent-mindedness. In a quiet voice, he said, "We arrested a few people, but all this time, the Chui family and Xinyang have helped the court a lot, so it was a bit embarrassing. So, according to the Empress Dowager's orders, those with status were released in the end." The young emperor didn't look at him, but the corners of his brows furrowed in disgust. He said, "Women are too kind. Since we've already fallen out, what's the point of looking at old feelings?" He was criticizing the Empress Dowager, so Wei Hua didn't dare to respond. The emperor shook his head, his gaze still lingering on the book. He continued, "But it doesn't matter whether we arrested them or not. How much of the goods did we seize?" "A lot." A glimmer of excitement flowed through Wei Hua's eyes. The information was accurate. The southern barbarians didn't expect us to break the old rules and were caught unprepared. They suffered quite a bit. He suddenly thought of something and asked hesitantly, "This is a bit absurd. Even if Fan Xian wanted to fight with the eldest princess for the palace treasury, there's no reason for him to give us such a large gift. Given his current power in the Qing kingdom, he could completely swallow the goods himself and not let them flow north." The emperor still didn't look at him. He said coldly, "To give me such a large gift, naturally he has something to ask of me. There's no problem with the timing. According to the news from the south, Fan Xian made his move before we did. The southerners shouldn't suspect that I'm working together with him to split the loot. They'll only think that I'm taking advantage of the situation." But he suddenly put down the book in his hand and narrowed his eyes at Wei Hua. The warning in his eyes was clear. "Only 5 people in the court know about this. I don't want the news to get out because of you." Wei Hua was terrified. He prostrated on the ground and swore an oath. "Please be at ease, Your Majesty. Although he was the son of Chang Ningho, he was actually closer to the emperor. He knew that the emperor was giving him a chance to take control of a powerful yamen like the Brocade Guard. It was up to him to see if he could grasp it. Are the Qing envoys still protesting? The emperor suddenly asked with interest. Wei Hua nodded and smiled bitterly. Sir Lin is making a ruckus in Honglu Temple every day, crying out for the Chui family. He says that the court didn't investigate and forcefully seized the Chui family's goods and money. It's outrageous and has greatly affected the friendship between the two countries. The emperor cursed. What is the Chui family? They're the biggest smugglers in the kingdom of Qing. I'm helping the southern barbarians discipline their people. Instead of thanking me, they're blaming me. These southern barbarians really don't know any manners. Wei Hua smiled bitterly. He thought, you're helping a foreign country discipline its merchants, but you're not willing to give up the goods and money you've already eaten. How is that reasonable? Lin Wen was the envoy of the kingdom of Qing stationed in Shangjing, but he didn't know the inside story. Of course, he had to fight for the people of his country. The most troublesome one is that advisor Wang Qinian. Wei Hua suddenly had a headache. Sir Lin is making a ruckus in Honglu Temple, but Sir Wang is running to Taichung Temple every day, asking to enter the palace to see His Majesty. He says that the Chui family is a famous merchant of the kingdom of Qing. As officials of the kingdom of Qing, they must protect the interests of the Chui family. The emperor was startled. He was so angry that he laughed. Interesting. How interesting. Not only is Fan Xian interesting, but his confidant is also so reckless. It's his own master who wants to kill the Chui family. But with this ruckus, not only has he helped Fan Xian clean up his mess, he's also tainted me. But toward his counterpart in the south, Wei Hua was still wary. He couldn't help but say, Your Majesty, if the whole story of this matter is secretly sent back to the kingdom of Qing, and the emperor of the Qing kingdom finds out that Fan Xian has been generous to his country and secretly colluded with our court, I'm afraid he'll be furious. Perhaps he won't be able to climb back up again. The negotiations between the two countries in the summer let him know how cold and ruthless Fan Xian, this gentle and refined scholar, was. So much so that after he took over as the commander of the Brocade Guard, he immediately saw Fan Xian as his greatest enemy. He constantly thought about how to make Fan Xian unlucky. Now that he thought of this evil plan that would make it difficult for Fan Xian to rise again, he couldn't help but feel excited. He looked at the emperor with a face full of hope. What disappointed him was the emperor still only shook his head. Take a longer view, the emperor said with a mocking tone. With a mocking tone, the emperor said, The goods of the Chui family are already within our borders. What is the use of seizing them? Do you think I care about the silver of these merchants? In the past, the court has always had dealings with the eldest princess. Both sides have received many benefits. Do you not understand the reason why we want to cooperate with Fan Xian this time? The emperor picked up the book on the table. As he read, he quietly said, The palace treasury of the southern court will soon belong to the Fan family. If you don't have enough confidence in destroying him, then it's best to be a bit more polite to him. The people of my country are still counting on Commissioner Fan to endlessly send cheap goods year after year. After Wei Hua left, the emperor's expression seemed to relax a lot in an instant. He stretched inelegantly and gave a big yawn. At this moment, a beautiful woman dressed in a luxurious palace dress lifted the curtain and walked out. Looking in the direction the new commander had left, she blinked and asked curiously, What were you talking about? It sounds like it has something to do with Fan Xian. Lily, every time you hear the name Fan Xian, you get so nervous. Aren't you afraid I'll be jealous? The young emperor pulled her into his arms and said flirtatiously. Fan Xian made a move against Xinyang in the south. I cooperated with him a little. It was not a little cooperation. The Chui family's route to the north had already been completely destroyed, and the goods and silver that had been left behind had all been seized by the Brocade Guard. A large clan famous for their business had one hand cut off, and the other hand within the Qing kingdom had long been completely cut off by the sinister and terrifying Overwatch Council. See, Lily giggled and replied, Of course I'm nervous. Sir Fan is our matchmaker. The young emperor thought about it and agreed. If Fan Xian hadn't come up with such a strange idea to have Ku He take Lily as a disciple, given Lily's background and identity, it would have been troublesome for her to enter the palace. What are you reading? See Lily curiously snatched the book from the emperor's hands. The emperor panicked and snatched it back. Fan Xian specially sent me the latest chapter of the story of the stone. It's unique in the world. Don't ruin it. See Lily smiled brightly and snuggled up to his side. How could Fan Xian dare to make a move against his own mother-in-law? The emperor shook his head. That bastard seems to be much more daring than I am. The palace in the south is much more complicated than here. Who knows? The noblest river in northern Xi was the Yuchuan River that flowed down from the mountains, circled around the royal palace, and then cut across the ancient city of Shangjing. The further up they went, the closer they got to the royal palace, and the quieter it became. It was snowing heavily today, and ice shards could be seen on the banks of the river. It was bitterly cold. In a place where the black eaves of the royal palace could be seen and the winter trees in the mountains, there was a small garden. Who knew what kind of person could live there? A young man of about 13 or 14 was doing hard labor in the garden. The young man's face was slightly chubby. He pulled the grindstone in the garden and gritted his teeth as he spun it around. The grindstone squeaked, but his legs were trembling. In this cold winter weather, the clothes on his body were drenched in sweat. It was truly a pitiful sight. After spinning around a few times, the young man finally couldn't stand it anymore. He pushed the handle in his hand and turned his head. There are no beans again. Why do you want me to push this empty grindstone? Can't you even afford a donkey? The person he was cursing at was sitting leisurely under the eaves, lying on a deck chair with a thick mattress. Her bright and unobtrusive eyes were watching the snowflakes whizzing past outside the eaves. She seemed to be lost in thought. Hearing the young man's angry roar, she yawned and stood up. She put her hands on her hips and said lazily, "It's snowing today. Where can I buy beans? As for the donkey, don't I have you now? I sold the donkey a few days ago. The chickens and ducks in the garden also need to be kept warm in the winter. They need money." The two people in this strange situation were, of course, Fan Xian, who had been exiled to northern Xi, and the most famous figure of northern Xi's younger generation, Haidang. Haidang wore a cotton jacket made of flowery cloth. Her hands were in her pockets. A trace of a smile flashed across her plain and unremarkable face. She looked at Fan Xian and said, "Your brother sent me a letter a few days ago. He told me to discipline you well." It would have been better if she hadn't said it. Once she said this, Fan Xian finally went crazy. He had been in Shangjing for a few days, and in the end, he had done nothing but be forced to do hard labor by this village girl. Even Yin had been sent away by her. This village girl's status was high. Her martial arts were strong, and she was quick-witted. He had thought of escaping many times, but it had never worked. Chapter 319. The snow was still falling. Fan Xian, who was by the stone mill in the garden, had finally completed 50 revolutions. Panting, he held onto the stone mill, feeling his entire body aching. He could not straighten his back. The sweat on his face turned into steam and rose, turning white in the face of the cold. It looked as if his entire body was smoking. "Wipe yourself, then change into dry clothes so you don't catch a cold." Haidang handed him a neat pile of clothes. Fan Xian shook his head angrily and went into the inner room to change. Not long after, he came out yelling, "There's no place to bathe. What should I do if I stink?" Haidang glanced at him and smiled. "It's winter, and the things your brother made haven't been shipped to Shangjing." Fan Xian couldn't help but shake his head again. "My brother drove me north, not to let you torture me. An uncut jade is worthless," Haitang said calmly. "I remember when we were chatting in the royal palace. Fan Xian once said something that I thought was very reasonable." "What did he say?" Fan Xian asked curiously. "When heaven is about to place a great responsibility on a man, it first torments his will, strains his muscles and bones, stars his skin, empties his body, and messes up his actions. Thus, the heart is moved, and one can do what one cannot. Actually, When Fan Xian said these words, he was thinking of the northern seashore, the crabapple spring scene among the reeds. But Fan Xizha and Haidang did not know of that person's filthy thoughts. Fan Xizha heard these words and felt a chill rush to the top of his head. In a trembling voice, he said, "Tonight, you won't have dinner yet, will you?" Haidang smiled slightly. "We won't be eating here tonight." As they spoke, someone outside the garden respectfully said, "Second young master, I will be the host tonight." Fan Xizha was surprised that this person had responded so naturally. He turned his head and saw that it was Wang Qinian. Unexpectedly meeting a family member in a foreign land, thinking of the suffering these days, and thinking of the possibility of escaping the abyss of misery, Fan Xizha's expression was excited. With a strange cry, he rushed over the fence. "After dinner, you still have to come back." Haitang's words drifted down from behind. Her words pierced through the wind and snow and burrowed into Fan Xizha's ears, causing him to shiver in incomparable disappointment. When he reached the fence, he turned around and shouted fiercely, "I came to Shangjing to earn money. I'm not here to be a coolie." Haidang had already returned to her reclining chair. Expressionlessly, she said, "How can 1,000 taels of silver become 10,000 so easily? I feel that Fan Xian is pushing you too hard. Don't forget, your silver is all in my hands now." Outside the fence, Wang Qinian gave Fan Xizha a meaningful glance, indicating that it would be best if he did not offend Lady Duo. Even Sir Fan Jr. did not have a complete corpse in her hands. "Why did you have to do this?" Fan Xizha snorted angrily and pushed open the gate. Wang Qinian smiled and bowed to Haidang under the eaves. "Miss Haidang, I'll go now." Haidang looked at him and suddenly calmed down. After a while, she said, "Sir Wang, are you really in such a hurry to let him take over the Chui family?" Wang Qinian's heart trembled. He had not expected her to even know of Commissioner Fan's arrangements. He did not know how much understanding Fan Xian and Haidang had. He could only smile bitterly. "What are you talking about, miss?" Haidang, of course, knew about Fan Xizha's arrangements. She smiled slightly and said nothing more. She only warned, "We've just begun. Don't be too impatient." Wang Qinian had his subordinates bring Fan Xizha a bamboo hat and a snow cloak. On one hand, it was to block the wind and snow. On the other, it was to hide his appearance. Then, he bowed to Haidang and prepared to leave the fields next to the palace. "Did you also read the most recent letter?" Haidang reclined in her chair and looked at Wang Qinian, who was about to leave, with a smile that was not a smile. Hearing this, Wang Qinian was startled. He smiled bitterly. "It is my duty. Miss Haidang, please forgive me. In the letter, please say a few words on behalf of me, so that the commissioner will not bully my daughter." Haidang laughed. This Honglu Temple of the Qing Kingdom's resident officer in northern Qi, Sir Wang Qinian, was indeed an interesting person. It was quiet outside the garden. Just like that, Haidang closed her eyes and fell asleep on the chair. Today in Shangjing, the wind and snow were intertwined. The wind whistled past, and the air was cold. The village girl slept very peacefully in such a cruel environment. There seemed to be a slight smile at the corner of her lips. With her astonishing cultivation, she was not surprised by the cold invading her body. On the contrary, she was closer to nature than ordinary people, such as the gentle nature of spring or the harsh world of winter. Snow, piece by piece, gradually filled the sky. Under the eaves, the girl in a flowery jacket slept very comfortably. After an indeterminate amount of time, Haidang slowly opened her eyes. Her clear eyes reflected the falling snow outside the eaves and the growing ice on the eaves. She could not help but feel a flash of joy and satisfaction. "Teacher, you're here." Outside the garden, on the stone path beside the Yuchuan River, a thick layer of snow had long been laid. At this moment, a person was slowly treading on the snow. The wind and snow seemed to have disappeared in an instant. One could only hear the rustling sound of each step landing on the snow. The person's feet were not wearing shoes. He stepped on the snow like this, determined and sincere. In a moment, he had reached the front of the garden. Stretching out a hand, he gently pushed open the fence door and walked directly to the eaves. He stretched out a palm and gently stroked the happy Haitong's head. "I've come to see you." One of the 4 great grandmasters in the world, Imperial Advisor Ku He, who was viewed as a god by the people of the world. If Fan Xian saw this scene, he would certainly silently criticize the other person's appearance for being so ordinary and unremarkable. He was far worse than Marshal Zhu. He couldn't even compare to Liu Yun's elegance of riding a boat halfway across the waves, particularly after he took off the straw hat on his head and revealed his large bald head. There was not a glimmer of an otherworldly feeling. He was just a simple and common old man. However, the pure white plain clothes on his body and his bare feet declared his identity as an ascetic monk. Ever since he returned from the temple, he had not undergone a single ascetic monk. Haiding bowed deeply to her teacher with incomparable respect. Then, she invited the most powerful figure in the world into the room and served tea. Like a little girl, she sat on the ground beside him with a face full of innocence. Only in front of this great grandmaster would Haidang be so obedient and natural. Kui's face was thin. His lips were very thin. His eyes were very sunken, but his gaze was even more distant. With a trace of tenderness, he looked at his true disciple and smiled slightly. "I come from Shi Mountain." Haitong's expression changed. She asked in surprise, "Have you found Sir Shaoan's body?" Kui slowly put down the teacup in his hand. With a trace of a smile in his eyes, he said, "In a cave between the precipices, I found the remains of an old friend." Haidang furrowed her brows. The precipices of Shi Mountain. After Kui returned from the south, he did not come out of seclusion. Some people in northern Shi guessed that this great grandmaster should have been injured, but they did not know who the other side of that terrifying battle that took place in an unknown place was. Some guessed it was Sigu Jian, some guessed it was Yi Luyun, and some guessed it was the Qing Kingdom's most deeply hidden great grandmaster. No one would have thought that he and Wu Zhu had both been injured. After He recovered. The first thing he did was carefully investigate Xiao Un's movements after he returned to the kingdom. Although this great grandmaster was faintly angry at the battle between the mother and son in the royal palace, Tianyi Dao followed the customs of the temple and rarely interfered in political affairs, so it was not good for him to say too much. But regarding Xiao Un's life and death, this great grandmaster, who seemed to be unable to care about external things, placed great importance on it. The precipices of Shi Mountain had been searched many times, but Shaoan's body had not been found on the mountain. This became the most piercing problem for the northern Shi court. If that old man was still alive, then perhaps Shang Shanhu, who was under house arrest in his manor, would become active again. But for Haidang, since Brother Lang Tiao said that Shaoan had lost all signs of life after being stabbed by the curved knife, she would naturally believe him. Great Grandmaster Ku, he had never doubted the judgment of his first disciple. So the Northern Qi people were only thinking about one question. Where was Xiao Un's body? No one knew how much effort they had expended in their search. Shi Mountain had been turned upside down, but they still could not find the whereabouts of Xiao In and the mysterious man. After all, the Northern Qi people could not understand how in this world there could be someone like a gecko who could climb up the mirror-like precipices of Shi Mountain. Later, it was Imperial Advisor Ku He who spoke, and the Northern Qi people resentfully stopped their search. They did not think that this great grandmaster would lower his status and personally go investigate. No one knew how much effort Ku he had put in before he finally found Xiao En's body in a cave in the precipice on this windy and snowy day. Haidang looked at her teacher in shock. Only now did she notice that there were small wounds on his ankles. She asked with concern, "How can you get down from that precipice?" She was not in a rush to ask Xiao In questions. What she was most concerned about was Ku He's health. After all, her teacher was old and had just recovered from his injuries. Ku He gently shook his head and smiled with a sigh. "Going down is a bit troublesome, but it's not impossible. All we need to do is tie a rope. I just didn't think that the person Lang Tiao forced down the precipice would be able to escape so easily." Haidang lowered her head slightly. Perhaps he was carrying something like a grappling hook on his body. The grappling hook has no place to borrow strength. Kui looked at her with a smile. You were so shocked earlier because you remembered what the precipice of Shi Mountain looked like. Haidang sighed. I really don't understand this matter, but it's already been a few months. Could it be that Sir Shao Un's remains have not been eaten by the eagles in the mountains? Kui's snow-like eyebrows fluttered slightly. He warmly said, that cave was very shallow. Logically speaking, vicious birds should have long since helped Sir Shao In ascend to the heavens. I didn't think that when I followed the rope down, what I saw was Sir Shao Un's remains, as good as new. There were a few dead birds lying beside him. The birds had all turned to bones, but his body, aside from being a bit dehydrated, had not rotted. Haidang was surprised to hear this. She smiled calmly. What a powerful poison. Kui gently nodded and changed the subject. Tell me about this young man, Fan Xian. I'm very curious about him. Haitang's heart skipped a beat, but her expression did not change in the slightest. Smiling, she recounted everything that Fan Xian had done in Shangjing. Knowing that she could no longer hide anything for Fan Xian, she quietly said, that night after Shao In left the capital, Fan Xian stayed with the diplomatic mission, but no one saw him with their own eyes. When I went the next day, he was lying in bed. Back then, elder brother believed that the black-clothed man who fell off the cliff with Shao In was him, and he really is an expert at using poison. Of all the people in this world, only Shao In and Ku he had ever come into contact with the temple. Now that Shao In was dead, only Ku he remained. The emperor had painstakingly rescued Shao In and brought him back to northern Qi, but Ku he had tried his best to kill him. Now that she knew that Fan Xian might be the last person Shao In saw before he died, and Ku he was so careful about the secret of the temple. Haidang did not know what trouble her words would bring to Fan Xian, but she knew that this seemingly gentle teacher in front of her was, in reality, a wise man who held the pearl of wisdom in his hands. He had changed the subject earlier, naturally, to remind her. Unexpectedly, Kui did not continue this topic. Instead, he gazed at her meaningfully and smiled. He took another sip of the tea in his cup and said, Duodwa's tea is getting better and better. You flatter me, teacher, Haitang replied gently. I think I know who Fan Xian is, Kui suddenly said very gently. His words came out of nowhere, and Haitang did not understand. She stared at her teacher in a daze. Kui slowly stood up, and a mellow smile rose to his face. Before this young man came to northern Qi, I went out and was injured. I think you must be very curious as to who in this world can injure me. Imperial advisor Ku, he represented the spirit of northern Qi, so the matter of his injury had always been hidden. Although Haidang knew, she had never heard the details from her teacher's mouth. Now that she heard it, she immediately focused her attention. It was a blind man. Kui turned and gazed at the wind and snow outside his disciple's garden. He slowly said, It was a blind man I met many years ago and have never forgotten. Haidang was shocked. She thought that it was already a shocking thing for someone in this world to be able to injure her teacher. She had not expected that the other person was not a great grandmaster known to the world, but a blind man. Kui continued to speak leisurely. It is very strange that this terrifying blind man seems to have forgotten some things. He has forgotten that many years ago, I once met him. Haidang listened quietly. This blind man has already disappeared for many years. The smile on Kui's face rose again. I did not expect that he would suddenly appear in this world again, and that the first person he came to find was me. Speaking of which, my heart, which has long been like an old well without ripples, is actually faintly proud. Haitang became more and more confused. This blind man once taught that idiot Sigu Jian a lesson. He once beat Yi Luyun until he abandoned his sword and finally became a great grandmaster. Kui sighed. I guess it wasn't back then, but I did not expect that he would come to find me this time. This is completely different from his secretive style in the past. Haitang suddenly opened her mouth and asked, Could it be that this blind man is the most mysterious great grandmaster? Kui shook his head. His eyes, which seemed to be able to see through everything, also revealed a trace of confusion. No, the blind man has never needed this kind of false reputation. As for the most mysterious of the four of us, he should still be in the Qing Kingdom's royal palace. Haidang did not understand. Since no one had ever seen the mysterious Great Grandmaster, why were the people so sure that he existed, and that he existed in the Qing Kingdom's royal palace? The reason is very simple. Ku-he smiled. Many years ago, Sigu Jian had tried 3 times to enter the Qing Kingdom's royal palace to assassinate their emperor. Haitang called out in surprise. Only now did she know that Dongyi's Sigu Jian had done such a crazy thing. However, to use the realm of a great grandmaster as an assassin, even if the Qing Kingdom's emperor was the person with the most power in the world, it would probably be difficult for him to resist. Seeming to guess what she was thinking, Ku-he quietly said, "The people who know of this all think the same as you. They all think that Sigu Jian has a great chance. Unfortunately, within a month, he failed 4 times in a row. Although he wasn't injured, he didn't have any results." Haidang furrowed her brows and said, "That blind man, was he in the Qing Kingdom's royal palace at the time?" She still believed that the blind man who could injure her teacher was most likely the mysterious Great Grandmaster. Ku-he smiled slightly and shook his head. At the time, the blind man was with a young lady of the Yi family in Jiangnan, repairing the palace treasury. The young lady of the Yi family? Haitang was even more shocked. Although she was the most famous figure of the younger generation, she knew of the secrets her teacher was talking about today. Each person was extraordinary and changed the shape of the world. Ku-he gently and naturally changed the topic. Turning around to look at Haitang, he said, "Do you understand now?" Haitang opened her bright eyes and shook her head. "Who is Fan Xian?" Ku-he looked calmly at his female disciple. Fan Xian is Yi Qingmei's son, the mistress of the Yi family's son. Other than being shocked, Haidang was also confused. Fan Xian, the illegitimate son of the Minister of Revenue in the Southern Court. How did he have a connection to the Yi family? The Yi family? The Yi family that once ruled the world through business? The Yi family that had established the Overwatch Council, repaired the palace treasury, and continued their legacy to this day? Ku-he rubbed his hands and sat down. He sighed. Xiao-en was always locked up by Chun Pingping, so he didn't know the identity of the young lady of the Yi family. I just happened to know. The blind man could only be a servant of a young lady of the Yi family. This time, I was moved out of Shangjing to make it easier for Fan Xian to do things. Thus, Fan Xian's identity emerged. He is the descendant of the young lady of the Yi family. Haitang shook her head. She dared to express her opinion in front of her teacher. Although this reasoning is believable, it is too far-fetched. What if that blind master was just unwilling to be lonely in the mountains and came out to challenge you? It has nothing to do with Fan Xian going north. Besides, wasn't the Yi family destroyed back then? Before she finished speaking, Ku-he had already laughed. One matter cannot explain too many things. But think about Fan Xian's current position in the Southern Court, and then think about the strange movements in the Southern Court after he came out of Danzhou. When too many details are put together, the truth of the matter is clear. Don't talk about the destruction of the Yi family. The shopkeeper of the Yi family is still alive and well. For someone in the Southern Court to preserve a trace of the Yi family's bloodline is not something strange. Haidang was so worried that she laughed. For a moment, she didn't know what to say. Her teacher was right. Even if Fan Xian was the illegitimate son of Minister Fan, even if he had the reputation of an immortal poet and the strength of an ace, given his identity and status, it was impossible for him to reach such heights. It was even more impossible for him to control the Overwatch Council in his left hand and the palace treasury in his right. The Overwatch Council and the palace treasury. Were these not the most powerful things that the Yi family had left to this world? Could it be that the gentle young man who often wrote to her had such a complicated and pitiful life behind him? You just repeated the poem Fan Xian recited in the restaurant. Ku-he gently patted his female disciple, who was still deep in thought. He smiled slightly and said, "You only discovered from this poem that he was the author of Story of the Stone. But if you think about it carefully, Perhaps you will find that Fan Xian used this poem to express some other emotions, such as anger or dissatisfaction. In the summer of Shangjing, in the Centenarian Pine House, Fan Xian and Haitang drank wine and recited a poem when they were drunk. Keep me in Qing, suddenly meet my benefactor. Fortunately, mother, you have accumulated a sinister merit. Advise life, help the needy, and support the poor. Do not be like my evil uncle and treacherous brother who love money and forget his own flesh and blood. It is exactly multiplication, division, addition, and subtraction. Above is the firmament. In the winter garden, Haitang repeated it in her heart. She finally experienced the emotions her teacher spoke of. She abruptly raised her head, shocked beyond compare. If Fan Xian, who was soaking in the hot springs far away in the Qing Kingdom's Tsang Mountains, knew that this pair of teacher and disciple would be so careless and use this poem to determine his birth, he would certainly be so angry that he would jump out of the hot springs and run naked to Shangjing to give them a good scolding and then explain that this was written by Lao Chao. It just happened to be similar to his own life. Before long, Haidang had already recovered her calm. In a gentle voice, she asked, "This matter can be big or small." Since she knew of Fan Xian's past, she could imagine that there would certainly be many problems between him and the Qing royal family. How to use it was a matter that required careful consideration. The news that Fan Xian is a descendant of the Yi family. Let the entire world know, Ku, he said very gently. Great Grandmaster Ku, he spoke very gently. The blind man, Haitang's heart was slightly confused. She didn't know how to protect Fan Xian's interests as much as possible. Ku, he slowly sighed and said, "Although the blind man doesn't seem to recognize me, I think that since he purposely acted and left behind these clues, perhaps he hopes to use my mouth to tell this interesting news to the people of this world." The great Grandmaster finally came to a conclusion. The blind man doesn't want to wait anymore. He wants Fan Xian to speed up his pace. To be continued. If you want to know what happens next, please log on to www.cmfu.com. More chapters. Support the author. Support original reading. Chapter 320. I have been sick recently and am in poor spirits, so I have rarely replied to reviews and updates. Everyone, please forgive me. After the wind and snow in the fields, the fragrance of tea still lingered in the room and floated in the quiet space. After a long time, Haidang quietly said, "I understand." Kui did not look at her face. Smiling slightly, he said, "Didn't Fan Xian ask you for the heart of Tianyi Dao in his letter? Give it to him. Give it to him." The two clean words made Haitang raise her head in shock. She didn't know if her teacher was joking or had lost his mind. The supreme heart of Tianyi Dao, that was a secret that could not be passed on. Was he going to give it to a powerful official of the southern court so easily? Kui smiled slightly and said, "This is something his mother gave me. It is only right that I return it to him. Besides, for the Qi kingdom, the more powerful Fan Xian is, the more headaches the southern royal family will have. It can satisfy my wish and also be beneficial to the country. It is the best of both worlds. Why not do it?" Haiding opened her mouth slightly and couldn't speak for a moment. She knew what her teacher's true intentions were. A chill grew in her heart. This teacher and disciple had only guessed the relationship between Fan Xian and the Yi family. They did not know Fan Xian's other identity, so they unilaterally thought that after his identity was exposed, Fan Xian could only be a ferocious tiger within the Qing kingdom. Back then, when the Yi family had disappeared like smoke, the Qing royal family would have to bear the greatest responsibility. In the eyes of the northern Qi people, the more powerful Fan Xian was, the more trouble Qing kingdom would have and the safer their country would be. "Teacher, if Fan Xian cannot withstand at this time, what do we do?" The Yi family's property had all been taken over by the Qing royal family. Logically speaking, once the news that Fan Xian was a descendant of a Yi family got out, the Qing royal family would kill him in the shortest amount of time possible. Kui shook his head and sighed quietly. The nobles who toppled the Yi family seem to have all died in that night of bloodshed in Jingdo a dozen years ago. I truly cannot guess what the subsequent events will be like. Does the Yi family still have enemies hiding in the royal palace in the south? Perhaps that blind man wants to use this matter to force those people to appear. As the imperial advisor of Northern Qi, Kuhi's first consideration was the interests of Northern Qi and the kingdom of the mother and son in the palace. As for what kind of predicament Fan Xian would face, it was not within his considerations. The old man smiled slightly and said, "Even if Fan Xian is unable to face the oncoming attack, with the blind man standing firmly behind him, even if he fails and wants to die, it will not be an easy matter." However, it was too risky to use the heart of Tianyi Dao to trade for such a powerful enemy. Furthermore, the words the teacher had said indicated a terrifying thing. The heart of Tianyi Dao had been given to the teacher by Fan Xian's mother. "Missy, what kind of person is she?" Haitang's face was full of shock. Kui furrowed his brows slightly and thought hard for a long time before he quietly said, "At the beginning, I thought she was a little fairy who did not touch the world of mortals. Later on, I discovered that was not the case. Heaven Meridian Warrior?" "He's not a Heaven Meridian Warrior." Kuhi continued to smile and said, "The young lady of the Yi family is a mysterious woman who far exceeds normal geniuses." After a long time, Haidang respectfully saw Imperial Advisor Kuhi out of the room. Looking at the teacher's bare feet stepping in the snow, the girl said in a gentle voice, "Teacher, Sir Xiao in the snow." Kuhi's figure paused slightly. A moment later, he said in a gentle voice, "He is with Master Zhuang." These two brothers were strangers in life, but they traveled together in death. It is not bad. Haitang lowered her head and did not say anything to hide her shock. It was not until today that she learned of this matter. This is a matter of the older generation. You young people have your own world. The heart must be personally handed to Fan Xian's hands. After Kui said this, he took a step and disappeared into the wind and snow. Flipping his straw hat, he covered his old and smooth head. In the valley of the Tsang Mountains in the Qing Kingdom, mist rose from the vast expanse of white snow. Dozens of beautiful red-crowned cranes spread their wings and danced. They floated down a few meters from the ground. As if afraid and timid, they tentatively extended their long feet and stepped on the large hot springs surrounded by cedar trees below the mist. The temperature of the hot springs was just right. It was a little hot. Fan Xian's eyes were closed. His upper body was bare as he soaked in the hot springs. His neck was tilted back and rested on the hard, wet black rocks beside the spring. Most of his body was submerged in the water. His exposed skin was stained with a layer of red. His arms were not thick, but they felt very strong. Two thin fingers rested firmly on his right wrist. Fei Jie's eyes were closed. His eyebrows were trembling. His messy hair, soaked in the spring water, became unprecedentedly smooth. After being summoned back to the capital, Fei Jie learned that Fan Xian had brought his family into the Tsang Mountains to spend the winter, so he hurried over. Today, the teacher and student were soaking in the hot springs surrounded by cedar trees. This kind of enjoyment was quite extravagant. "Your figure is not bad." Fei Jie slowly opened his eyes and withdrew his hand from feeling his pulse. The ominous brown in his eyes grew darker and darker. "You usually can't see it when you're wearing clothes." Fan Xian also opened his eyes and smiled. "The brothers of the Third Bureau have long praised my figure." He paused and then asked, "Teacher, do you have any ideas?" Fei Jie took a white towel from behind his neck and wet it in the hot spring water. He forcefully wiped the loose skin on his face and didn't speak for a while. Fan Xian sighed. Seeing his teacher like this, he knew that he didn't have any good ideas for disappearing the Jinqi in his body after it exploded. "You won't take the medicine I left for you." Fei Jie sighed worriedly. "Why try to be brave? If you take it, at most your Jinqi will be greatly damaged. At the very least, it won't explode." Fan Xian shook his head. "To me, greatly damaged Jinqi or no Jinqi at all, what's the difference? There's a big difference. At least you have the power to protect yourself. Fan Xian laughed. His handsome face was full of confidence. I still have many ways to save my life. You know that since I was young, I have never been a barbarian who relied on martial arts to conquer the world. In the past, I could fight Haidang with my little tricks. Although my Jinqi is all gone now, I don't think that if anything happens, I can only wait for death with my hands tied. Fei Jie stared into his eyes for a long time before sighing. What a little monster. For a warrior, the importance of Jinqi goes without saying. Even if you have the Tiger Guards and the 6th Bureau watching, you should still show some sadness and disappointment. That's unnecessary emotion. Fan Xian recalled Uncle Wu Zhu's teachings when he was young. Faintly, he said, "If I can't be cured, then I have to accept this reality." Sighing and groaning won't help change the situation. Fan Xian, who was in the hot spring in Song Mountain, did not know that in the distant north, that unfathomable pair of master and disciple had already determined his identity as if it was child's play. They wanted to use this identity to throw the Qing court into chaos and push him against the Qing royal family. Regardless of whether or not Haidang would delay this matter, the distance between the two countries was too great. No matter how fast the rumors flew, at least for now, it could not reach the Qing kingdom. Thus, for Fan Xian, who knew nothing about the Yi family descendants' past, it was not his greatest danger or headache. Right now, he only wanted to recover the Jinqi in his body and heal the damaged walls of his meridians. Take care at first. Fei Jie was silent for a long time. I will prescribe a method. Take the medicine according to the prescription. Also, don't throw away the medicine I left for you when you were young. They're still useful. Fan Xian was a little surprised. His Jinqi had already dissipated, so why would he take the medicine? In truth, Fei Jie didn't know what use it had. He just mentioned it in passing. He didn't expect that, after so long, Fan Xian would actually use it. I've been in Song Mountain for half a month. I wonder how things are going in the capital. Fan Xian gently patted the hot spring's surface and smiled. You've come from the capital. Tell me about it. Fei Jie scolded him. You receive at least a dozen intelligence reports every day, and you're still asking an old man like me? Fan Xian chuckled. Fei Jie said coldly. You used the excuse of recuperating to hide in Song Mountain, but the council moved against the Chui family. The capital has long been in an uproar. The north has captured hundreds of people and swallowed millions of taels of silver worth of goods. The crime you gave Chui Jian is also very real. It looks like a great family is about to be overthrown. You really are ruthless. Fan Xian smiled and explained, it's all what the court needs. The Overwatch Council's declaration of war against Xinjiang was abnormally fierce and sudden, and their actions were extremely ruthless. Spies all over the world had long ago blocked off the Chui family's smuggling routes to the north. With Yin Bingyun at the head of the 4th Bureau, they brazenly made their move. Without giving Xinjiang any time to react, they had already taken control of most of the people, goods, and money. After all, Fan Xian had been seriously injured. Everyone in the capital knew that he was recuperating in Song Mountain. Who would have thought that the sickly commissioner would suddenly and ruthlessly strike? This plan had been planned from the summer until now, and only after receiving the emperor's tacit approval did it quietly begin. Even if Xinjiang had more power in the various counties, they still suffered a great loss. Most importantly, Fan Xian had hidden his thoughts deeply. The eldest princess, Li Yunrui, had clearly underestimated her son-in-law. This time you've really offended the eldest princess. Fei Jie shook his head and sighed. The Chui family is one of the eldest princess's hands. You've cut off this hand of hers. Aren't you afraid that she... Fan Xian didn't finish speaking, but he understood what his teacher meant. After thinking for a moment, he quietly said, At the beginning, I was also worried. But after fighting with the second prince, I suddenly realized that there was nothing for me to worry about. With the Emperor's secret approval and the enormous power of the Overwatch Council, who in this world can stand against me? Fei Jie knew that Fan Xian was not a mediocre person who would get carried away with success, so he quietly listened to what his student had to say next. The resources I hold in my hands are too powerful. Fan Xian sighed. Regardless of whether it is the princes or the officials in the court, none of them are a match for me. The director once told me to set my sights higher. Only now do I understand that this not only represents the direction of the future, but it also requires me to cultivate this kind of confidence, even pride, as a commissioner of the Overwatch Council. Today, in the court, there are very few people who can stand against me. Fan Xian analyzed himself expressionlessly. In the end, the court is an organization of violence. Aside from the military, no other government can compare to the Overwatch Council. And the Emperor has always kept a tight grip on the military. This time, when he chased the Yi family out of the capital, it was a clear signal. Although the eldest princess has her own power in the military, the Emperor long ago moved Yin Xiaoyi out of the capital. What does Xinyang have to compete with me? From Danzhou to the capital, it had only been 2 years. Following the changes of the times, with the efforts of Chun Pingping and Fan Jian, his mother's former comrades in arms, and with the tacit approval of the Emperor of the Qin Kingdom, that beautiful young man had, in a very short period of time, gained power that the world could not imagine. This kind of power was something that even he did not truly feel. It was not until he easily defeated the second prince in the capital that he suddenly realized that he seemed to have underestimated himself in the past. As long as the Emperor's royal favor did not fade, as long as the old woman in the palace still thought that the young man was, after all, of royal blood, as long as Chun Pingping continued to live out his days in Chun Garden and threw all of the power of the Overwatch Council to him to play with, Fan Xian would firmly stand in the Qin court and not have to worry about any problems. Fei Jie suddenly said, Yin Xiaoyi is in the north. Did he not act this time? The northern expedition camp is far away from Tsangzhou. There are countless valiant generals in the camp, 100,000 soldiers. Fan Xian laughed mockingly. They were unable to react at all. But the elders of the Cui family should have escaped to the camp. That line in Tsangzhou, the 4th Bureau has not been able to completely strangle it. Fei Jie looked at him and suddenly laughed. Not bad at all. Fan Xian finally became modest. I'm just a man who has made up his mind. For me to be able to do this so beautifully is all thanks to Yan Bingyan. Fei Jie laughed. In less than half a year, you were able to pull Ruohai's precious son into your camp and have him rack his brains to plan for you. You really are not bad. Fan Xian was silent. He suddenly thought of Lady Shan. At this time, she should be playing mahjong with one and the others in the Tsang Mountain estate. He thought to himself, after the matter with the Cui family is settled, should I invite Sir Yin Jr. to the mountains to spend the winter? Thinking of the estate half a mountain away from the hot springs, his mood suddenly improved. He pleaded to Fei Jie, Teacher, about what I said yesterday, please consider it carefully. Fei Jie frowned and coughed. You want a girl as beautiful as a flower to follow me to study medicine. Isn't that a bit too pitiful? Even if I agree, the minister will not allow it. I will talk to father, Fan Xian pleaded. My sister really likes medicine. Teacher, please take the trouble. Fei Jie scolded him. My name is Fei Jie, not Fei Xian. Fan Xian smiled. He knew that his teacher was angry, and that meant he had agreed. After a long time, Fei Jie's brows suddenly flashed with a trace of worry. But have you thought about it? The director and I are both getting old. There will come a day when we have to leave. Fan Xian was silent. After a moment, he suddenly said, I think the director must have told you about my past. Fei Jie nodded expressionlessly. At least up until now, His Majesty has been good enough to you. Fan Xian did not deny this. For an illegitimate child, the emperor was able to generously give him the Overwatch Council and the palace treasury. This kind of power, which even princes could not have, was enough to make up for the so-called status problem in the hearts of ordinary people. But the problem was that Fan Xian was not originally a person of this world. What he asked for was actually simpler. When he looked at problems, he would also be simpler. These two enormous organizations were originally my mother's, not the Qing royal families. Giving them to me is something that should be done. If you don't give them to me, then you are shameless. Fei Jie did not know what he was thinking. He sighed and said, "Back in Danzhou, you said you wanted to be a doctor or a chef. In reality, I was very happy, but I was also a little disappointed. The lady's family business needs to be inherited by you. But now, seeing that you are about to inherit everything from her, I feel a faint fear. I don't know if you will regret it in the future." Fan Xian understood what his teacher was worried about. What if one day, the emperor suddenly felt that his power was too strong and posed a threat to the future heir? What should he do then? He smiled and comforted Fei Jie. "Don't worry. At least for a few years, I think the emperor will trust my loyalty." He touched the scar on his chest. It was still a little itchy. After soaking in the hot spring, it appeared even redder and more sinister. "Don't forget, she is the Empress Dowager's favorite daughter," Fei Jie warned. "Furthermore, she is a madwoman. On the battlefield, she is no match for you. She will use some crazy methods, just like in the past years on Yalan Street." Fan Xian suddenly fell silent. A moment later, he said, "There is one in the courtyard. Naturally, she won't do anything. As for inside Jingdo, even if she goes crazy, she still has to fear the emperor. If she really wants to vent her anger, the best chance is to kill me while I am injured and not under the eyes of the emperor in Jingdo." Fei Jie sighed. "It's good that you understand this point." Fan Xian smiled and said, "The current me is not so easy to kill." With a swish, it was as if a servant had taken a knife and carefully cut open a piece of rice paper. 1 li behind the hot spring in Tsang Mountain, on the pure white and sparkling snow in the pine forest, a bright red liquid suddenly floated across. It landed on the ground and quickly died and soaked. The color was difficult to erase. An assassin clutched his throat and made a gurgling sound. He fell dead on the snow with a muffled thud. The swordsman of the 6th Bureau of the Overwatch Council slowly withdrew his cold sword from behind a tree. He bowed to Gauda, who was a few feet away, and disappeared into the snow again. The 7th. Gauda's face was serious. He still carried the long knife on his back. He said to his subordinate, "In a moment, take it to the back of the mountain and burn it." "Yes." Gauda was silent. Recently, there had been more and more assassins sneaking into Tsang Mountain with the intention of assassinating Commissioner Fan. He also knew where these assassins came from. Xinjiang was indeed somewhat crazy. After the Cui family was destroyed, they chose the most direct method of revenge. Unfortunately, they had clearly underestimated the defensive power around Commissioner Fan. The 7 Tiger Guards were the personal bodyguards the Emperor had assigned to Fan Xian. However, in this small-scale battle of assassination and counter-assassination, the truly terrifying ones were the swordsmen of the 6th Bureau of the Overwatch Council. These swordsmen's profession was assassination. They were the official assassins of the Qing Kingdom. Now, in the snowy mountains, they were facing the assassins sent by Xinjiang. Naturally, they were incomparably skilled at killing them. Their defense was watertight. In less than 3 days, they had already killed 7 assassins without suffering any injuries themselves. Gauda looked at the smear of blood on the white snow and sighed. He was the emperor's personal guard in the palace. It was not until today that he realized that these tiger guards were very powerful when used to kill enemies head-on. However, when it came to assassination and protection, they were still a bit lacking compared to the people of the 6th Bureau of the Overwatch Council. As the leader of the Tiger Guards, he knew that if these 6th Bureau swordsmen fought him head-on, none of them would be his match. The problem was, assassins would never fight head-on. Gauda silently thought that if the head assassin of the 6th Bureau came to assassinate him, he would not have a sliver of a chance of survival. After Fan Xian was injured, the level of defense around him had already increased by a few levels. Particularly after Chun Pingping's outburst of anger, the 6th Bureau of the Overwatch Council finally reacted in shame. They directly placed 12 swordsmen around Fan Xian. In the past, this level of defense was only used by the Emperor when he traveled. After the Emperor frequently used the Tiger Guards in the entire world, only Qin Garden would have such tight defenses. After Fan Xian learned of this, he did not give any orders. He only ordered the people of the Qinian unit to withdraw. Not a single person of the First Bureau was allowed to follow him into the mountains. Only Deng Ziyu and Su Wenmao were left to be responsible for communication. As for Chun Pingping's anger, he treated it as a joke. "You old cripple, had someone stab me, and now you're scolding your subordinates for not protecting themselves. How shameless." As Gao De was silently marveling at the power of the Overwatch Council, there were others who had similar thoughts. The leader of the assassins that Xinjiang had sent to the Song Mountains was wearing a white robe. Hidden in the snow, he carefully observed everything in the mountains. He was a death soldier from Xinjiang. He had long given his life to the eldest princess. But seeing the scene just now, he couldn't help but feel a chill in his heart. It had already been 3 whole days. Never mind assassinating Fan Xian. The Xinjiang assassins had not even been able to see Fan Xian's face. The continuous, silent deaths of his subordinates made the leader of the assassins, for the first time, think of retreating. Even if it was the Emperor's tiger guards protecting Fan Xian, he had enough confidence to try. Xinjiang guessed that Fan Xian's injuries were strange. They estimated that he would not recover for a while. But the problem was that the Overwatch Council, the 6th Bureau, and the official assassins were too powerful. They seemed to be able to instinctively smell every strange scent in the snowy mountains and could find all the hidden dangers. With such a group of people protecting Fan Xian, only if Xinjiang sent an army up the mountain would they be able to kill him. The leader of the assassins furrowed his brows. He decided to slide down the tree trunk and return to Xinjiang to report the details of this failure. He was very confident in his martial skills. As long as he made detailed arrangements for the 6th Bureau of the Overwatch Council, he would certainly be able to kill Fan Xian next time. His body moved slightly, and a speck of snow drilled into his neck. It was slightly cool, then extremely cold. A black metal drill, separated by a thick layer of snow, accurately pierced into his neck. To be continued. If you want to know what happened next, please log on to www.cmfu.com. More chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 321. There was one thing in this world that was the God of all people, the soul of all gods, and even ghosts were forced to fight for it. On the Fan family carriages, one could often see the family crest of the Fan family, a square and a circle. It was the shape of this thing. Master Fan was the Minister of Revenue and controlled the national treasury. Young Master Fan was about to go to Jiangnan to take over the palace treasury. The wealth of the kingdom of Qing was controlled by this family, and even the family crest was full of the stench of money. Money. Money that people loved and hated. Money that could make people go to heaven and go to hell. Money that could make people laugh on a mountain of knives and dance crazily in a sea of fire. Not only did the people love money, but the court loved money even more. That was why they set up so many taxes. They wanted to scrape off 3 layers of land. As for the court of the kingdom of Qing, since the founding of the kingdom, they had begun to tax salt, iron, and tea in addition to land and corvée labor. Later, because of the sudden rise and fall of the Yi family, the palace treasury became the court's largest source of money. As for the glassware, liquor, toys, and ships produced by the palace treasury, the court naturally imposed heavy taxes. Furthermore, they were always guarded very strictly, and the Overwatch Council was in charge. So when the Chui family smuggling was investigated by the Overwatch Council, it shocked the world. It was not until the day that the people of the Kingdom of Qing knew that there was such a big gap in the palace treasury, and that the court had lost so much money in taxes. The imperial censorate was silent, and so were the officials who had been bribed by Xinjiang. But there were still some officials from different factions or with righteous hearts who began to submit petitions, asking the court to investigate the matter thoroughly. Although no one dared to mention the eldest princess name in the petitions, the spearhead was pointed directly at Xinjiang. In comparison, the young emperor of Northern Qi also took advantage of the situation. The matter of Commissioner Fan of the Overwatch Council recovering on Tsang Mountain was intentionally or unintentionally left out. Although everyone knew that Commissioner Fan was the mastermind behind this operation, making it easier for him to take over the palace treasury next year, no one dared to say anything. On the contrary, the impulsive students of the Imperial College had already begun to prepare petitions, asking the emperor to transfer control of the palace treasury to young Master Fan. Fan Xian's reputation was indeed much better than that of the eldest princess. Naturally, part of this was due to the snowy words of the past, and in recent days, rumors began to spread among the tea houses and dining tables of the capital. It was said that Xinyang had begun to send out crazy assassins to murder young Master Fan. The efficiency of the 8th Bureau of the Overwatch Council was indeed high. Not everyone could completely understand the conflict between Fan Xian and the eldest princess. Many lofty scholars had always been puzzled as to why the people of the world were so passionate about this kind of thing, to the extent that they would not hesitate to shed blood for it. For example, Shi Chanli. Although he was now a famous figure in the entertainment industry in the capital and the owner of the Baiwa brothel, he still did not understand this point. Why was the eldest princess so reluctant to let go of the palace treasury? Recently, he had even used such ruthless methods to deal with his son-in-law. She used the Chui and Ming families to smuggle to Dongyi and even overseas. Why did she dig so much silver from the palace treasury? Over the past 10 years, where did all the wealth she had plundered go? Nurturing soldiers. Fan Xian looked at the only student by his side and explained, "The army is all the emperors and the courts. Although Yin Xiaoyi is the noble governor of the north, if he wants to do anything in the future, I'm afraid he won't be able to stand up to the emperor's edict. You know, in our country, particularly in the army, how high the emperor's prestige is. If you want to contend with this kind of prestige, there's only one thing in the world that can have a certain effect. That is money," Fan Xian said with a smile. "A large amount of money. The monthly income of the officers under Yin Xiaoyi is so high that you would probably be dumbfounded if you heard about it. It is precisely because of this that Yin Xiaoyi is able to control the military power in his hands as firmly as possible." Shi Chanli stopped copying notes with his right hand and laughed bitterly. He had entered the mountains this time because he had been entrusted by the Imperial College to write the biography of Fan Xian, the current civil official of the Qin Kingdom. Ever since Fan Xian published Bang Xian's Haishu Hua, his position in the world of poetry in the Qin Kingdom had been firmly established. Even when he left for northern Qi and brought back Master Zhuang's carriage of books, his influence spread even further. Of course, the Imperial College was proud of this young Master Fan, who had risen from the Imperial College's principal to the Ministry of Education. They did not want to miss out on this kind of resource, so they decided to write a biography of Fan Xian, which would be published by Dombo Bookstore and distributed to the world. This was to win over more students in the north and Dongyi in the coming year, and also to bring more scholars to the Qin Kingdom to participate in the spring examinations. But after Fan Xian was injured, he hid in the Tsang Mountains and did not go to the Imperial College for a long time. Even Shu the scholar could not find him, so he had to use his connections here and there to find Fan Xian's only student in the capital, Shi Chanli. Shi Chanli also felt that this matter was very promising, and with the Imperial College's personal invitation, he felt that it was much more glorious than being the owner of a brothel in Baiwa brothel. So he eagerly ran into the Tsang Mountains. He was lucky that he did not see the corpses in the snow. How could he have predicted that things would develop differently from what he had imagined? Although he had begged his teacher to stay in the study, his teacher did not talk about his life, his studies, or his poetry. Instead, he talked about the secrets of the court, such as how the Overwatch Council defeated the second prince, and why the eldest princess refused to let go of the palace treasury. Shi Chanli did not have the courage to write these things down on paper. Even if he did, the Imperial College would not dare to publish them even if they had 800 heads. He looked at his teacher and said in a chilly voice, "Teacher, these things can't be written into the biography." As for the matter of writing a biography, Fan Xian felt that it was ridiculous. He thought to himself that he was so young. Were the scholars of the Imperial College going to seal his coffin? Seeing Shi Chanli's awkward expression, He laughed and scolded him. Right my ass. He cursed and then said, "Is the Imperial College so free that it has nothing better to do? When will they be able to sort out Master Zhuang's books? The Dombo bookstore is waiting to open the printing, and the Emperor is also rushing them. It's not like you don't know that the Emperor wants me to sort them out within 3 years. These freeloaders only know how to flatter me and don't know how to do proper work." Sure, Chanli carefully explained on behalf of the Imperial College. Master Zhuang's books have already begun to be printed in batches. Fan Xian shook his head and continued. Then tell me about the absurd matter of writing a biography for me. Even though I've written a few poems, sung a few songs, and conversed with Master Zhuang twice in my life, don't you know that my most glorious career, the one that I'm truly proud of, is still these shady things? These words were spoken truthfully, and were even close to Rizzo's self-analysis, except there was not a trace of remorse. What I am most proud of is killing people and using poison, not those romantic things. If you can write them, do you dare to write them? Fan Xian stared into Chanli's eyes. If you want to write a biography for me, wait until the day I die, or when the people of this era all die. If you are still struggling to live, it won't be too late to talk about it then. Chanli sighed sorrowfully. He knew that the work of writing down notes could not be completed. His teacher had already made up his mind, and it would be difficult for him to convince him otherwise. However, he had already been intrigued by the court secrets that Fan Xian had spoken of earlier. Returning to his teacher's previous topic, he said, "Regarding the matter in the north, I think that General Yin Xiaoi blindly uses money to buy loyalty. Even if he wants to rebel, I don't think it will be of much use." Under the influence of his teacher for half a year, Chanli was like Cece from Danzhou. He had grown a lot bolder, and his words were also a lot sharper. The Emperor has a tight grip on the army. Fan Xian raised his eyebrows. The eldest princess doesn't have any loopholes to exploit. She only has a trusted aide like Yin Xiaoi, so of course she has to throw out a lot of silver. Every bit of loyalty she can earn is a bit more. Although it costs a lot to raise soldiers, that is the palace treasury. Is 10 years only enough to do this? Of course not. Fan Xian explained like a teacher. The second prince wants to bribe the officials of the capital. This requires money. He wants to control public opinion. This requires money. Xinyang wants to befriend the local officials, the feudal lords of a region. This also requires money. The word official has 2 mouths, and the officials of the kingdom of Qing are all very healthy. Their mouths are wide open. To feed these people, it really costs a lot. Sure, Chanli frowned. This is equivalent to rebellion. You said that before. Fan Xian laughed. Right now, it is only at the stage of the fight for the throne. If the second prince really succeeds, he will have imperial power in his hands. It will be very easy for him and his aunt to get back the silver they have given out. Fan Xian suddenly thought of the scene in The Deer and the Cauldron, where Wei Xiaobao framed Wu Sangue. He laughed bitterly. Of course, once he becomes the emperor, he won't need to care about this small amount of money. The whole world will be his. Chanli sucked in a breath of cold air. Teacher, you want to take over the palace treasury, and you want to destroy the Cui family ahead of time. Isn't this cutting off the other side's source of money? This will cause great damage to the second prince's fight for the throne. No wonder Xinyang is so angry this time. Compared to the disturbance in the capital, their reaction is much stronger. Fan Xian laughed coldly. Reaction? 5 or 6 years ago, that mother-in-law of mine began to react. His mind flashed back to 5 or 6 years ago, to that little building in Danzhou that had been burned to a crisp. It was in that building that he had killed someone for the first time. After entering the capital, Fan Xian used the power of the Overwatch Council to investigate this matter clearly. That year, Lady Lu wanted to poison him because of the 2 women in the palace. It was in that year that His Majesty first proposed a marriage between the Fan and Lin families. It was also the same as proposing the transfer of jurisdiction over the palace treasury. Although this marriage did not succeed for the time being under Chen Pingping's strong opposition, it still made the eldest princess wary. She did not want to easily let go of the enormous wealth she firmly controlled, so she had arranged for someone to kill Fan Xian. But no one could have imagined that 4 years later, when Chun Pingping was returning home to worship his ancestors, Fan Jian would bring up the matter again. Finally, he received His Majesty's permission. Thus, Fan Jian had Teng Zijing rush thousands of miles to bring Fan Xian from Danzhou to the capital. When he thought of the muddle-headed 12-year-old Fan Xian, he had already carried such a heavy burden on his shoulders and had already gotten into so much trouble. Fan Xian, who had long since grasped power, still felt some lingering fear. And then there was the Nyolan Street incident. The second prince had invited him to a banquet, and the eldest princess had secretly instigated the second son of the prime minister's manor to organize a murder. Now that he thought about it, his mother-in-law had tried to kill him 3 or 4 times, but had not succeeded. Fan Xian smiled bitterly as he thought about it. All the dangers he had faced in his life seemed to have been carried out by the eldest princess, who was so beautiful it made people forget her age. Furthermore, the eldest princess had not personally taken action. She had only used some scheming methods to dirty other people's hands. This woman with an obsession with cleanliness, had actually used people from Xinjiang to assassinate him. It looked like she was truly angry and flustered. A confident smile rose to the corners of Fan Xian's lips. As long as you are angry, it is fine. If you were still as calm as before, I would not know how to act. He deeply believed in the Xinjiang princess's ability to scheme. Just from the Nyolan Street incident turning into a clever scheme to seize northern Qi's land, and the sale of Yin Bingyun in exchange for the Qin court's chaos, he could see the eldest princess's ability to scheme. But he was not afraid of this, because the Overwatch Council was also best at scheming. Sir Yin Jr. was also a genius, and he had an unresolvable hatred for the eldest princess. Most importantly, other than scheming, the Overwatch Council also had power, and this was what Xinjiang lacked the most. To deal with schemers, simple swords, blood, and fire were the most effective methods. The eldest princess is an amazing woman. Fan Xian woke up from his contemplation and sighed. Truly amazing. At the beginning, all the civil and military officials in the court thought she was helping the Eastern Palace. No one thought of her agreement with the second prince. Those in the court who hate her, such as my father-in-law who has already left the court, will unconsciously lean towards the second prince. And the people she controls on behalf of the Eastern Palace can be thrown out at any time to be villains. If this situation continues for another 7 or 8 years, when His Majesty is old, perhaps the second prince will really be able to enter the Eastern Palace. It's a pity she met the teacher, Shi Chanli said. Fan Xian was not modest. I was just a bit lucky. And do you think the Emperor and Director Chun really don't know about this? Shi Chanli was slightly surprised. Fan Xian smiled bitterly. No matter how amazing a woman the eldest princess is, in the end, she is still no match for those old fellows. I'm just a hand pushed to the front stage. Perhaps the Emperor just doesn't want the Empress Dowager to be angry. He suddenly tilted his head slightly and looked at the vast expanse of white mountains outside the glass window. With a slight sense of loss, he said, "However, among these powerful figures, the one I actually admire the most is my father-in-law, who has long left Jingdo." Shi Chanli didn't understand. He had thought his teacher would say the one he admired the most was Minister Fan. Fan Xian smiled slightly. My father-in-law is known to the world as a treacherous minister, but he is actually a rare capable official. The Qin kingdom in the past few years could truly be said to be prosperous and the people at peace. Although there were small disagreements, in the end, they did not affect the overall situation. He made great efforts. What I admire about my father-in-law is that he is very patient and very decisive. At the beginning, because of the eldest princess, Sigu Jian killed my second brother-in-law. My father-in-law immediately agreed to my marriage to one her and stood without hesitation on the side of the Overwatch Council and my father. Don't forget, he and Director Chen's father have fought for many years in court. For him to make such an important decision and immediately make a plan, it is truly extraordinary. He then sighed and said, Furthermore, my father-in-law holds the power of the prime minister in his hands, but he is not attached to it. Once he discovered that the emperor had other thoughts, he immediately resigned. Although he lost the power in his hands, at the end of the day, his family is safe and his clan is peaceful. After Fan Xian's father-in-law, Prime Minister Lin Ruofu, retired, he had always lived out his retirement in Wuzhou. He was a wealthy man and often had correspondence with his family in Jingdou. It was said that he had been doing well recently. His health was even better than when he was in Jingdou. It is easy to understand others, but difficult to understand oneself, Fan Xian sighed and said. Father-in-law knows people, knows oneself, knows the time, and knows the situation. There is truly too much for me to learn. Shi Chanli's heart jumped slightly. He thought of how the court in Jingdou was still empty. It was only the officials of the Hall of Governmental Affairs who were helping with political affairs. In a small voice, he said, Teacher, in the future, you will eventually become the prime minister of the court. Fan Xian laughed bitterly and scolded, Don't test me. I have no interest, and I don't have the ability. How can governing a country be as simple as cooking a little fish? As for me, in the future, managing the Overwatch Council is where my interest lies. Managing the palace treasury is the emperor's edict. I won't do anything else. Shi Chanli smiled and said, Teacher, your words are interesting. However, just mentioning these two things is enough to make others envious. Let me tell you something. You know that after my father-in-law retires, the emperor does not plan to re-establish the position of prime minister. Fan Xian stood up and leaned on his walking stick. Moving to the window, he pushed it open and smelled the cool wind coming from the snow. Faintly, he said, The retiring master of the Bureau of Documents, Mr. Hu, has already risen by imperial edict and is coming to Jingdou. Shi Chanli paled in shock. Which Mr. Hu? How many others? Fan Xian did not turn around. Lightly, he said, When you and I were still children, that Mr. Hu pushed hard for the improvement of literature. The emperor has ordered him to return to the capital as a scholar. In the future, there will be no place for the Minister of Appointments, Yan Hangshu. Qin Heng will also be the Jingdou garrison. The Hall of Governmental Affairs will be led by a few scholars. There is no possibility of re-establishing the position of prime minister. Shi Chanli was silent. A moment later, he sighed lightly and said, In the past, I only knew how to study and serve the court. Only now do I know that the matters of the court are incomparably complicated. It is not something that outsiders can guess. After a while, he became happy again. Although the things he heard today could not be recorded in history and were of no help to the Imperial College's advertising business, these secrets were never passed on. Since his teacher had told him today, decades later, if he had the opportunity to write this into the history of the country or publish a mountain-dwelling notebook of the master of Bangxian's High, he would, without question, leave his name in the annals of history. Of course, his teacher had to be the victor of history. Thinking of this, he felt a faint excitement in his heart. For some reason, he heard his teacher look out the window and laugh. Do you know that Director Chen's true age is a bit younger than the emperor? Shi Chanli's joyful heart was greatly surprised. He had once seen Qin Pingping from afar and knew that the director was old and clumsy. It looked like he was about to sink into the yellow earth. Was he younger than the emperor in his prime? Younger by a month, Fan Xian said with a not-quite-there smile. The affairs of the court are too complicated. There is too much to worry about, so it naturally becomes like this. I wonder if, in the future, I will also age prematurely. Outside the window was a bleak expanse of snow. From the end of the corridor came the laughter of girls playing mahjong. Rojia had shamelessly come again. Yiling, that bold and thick-skinned person, had also hurried back from Dingzhou. The Fan Manor's estate in the Tsang Mountains was always lively in the winter. Compared to last year, it seemed that only the little fatty in northern Qi was missing. Fan Xian narrowed his eyes and welcomed the cold wind that blew against his face. In complete contrast to the joyous mood at home, he was silent. Working for the emperor in this shitty court, just like Qin Pingping, was truly a very exhausting job. Everyone seemed to have a few faces at the same time. No one knew what kind of cards each person held in their hands. Fanxian didn't know what other people's trump cards were, so he always held his trump cards tightly in his hands and would not easily play them out. Following a rustling sound, Deng Ziyu, draped in a black snowy robe, came to the front of the house. He was about to knock on the door when he found that the window was open. Commissioner Fan was waving at him. He was slightly surprised and walked over. In a low voice, he said, "The follow-up people from Xinyang have already retreated. The director sent Zhong Jue to follow them." Fanxian nodded. The official called Zhong Jue and Wang Qinian were known as the two wings, and they were best at tracking. Fanxian was not worried about his safety. Seeing the paper bag in Deng Ziyu's hand, he very naturally extended his hand. Inside the paper bag was the analysis of the intelligence reports drawn up by the Third Bureau, as well as the correspondence. Deng Ziyu's expression became somewhat strange. He chuckled and said, "There's a letter from the north." Fanxian was surprised, but immediately understood. He laughed and scolded, "You're a man. Don't learn from those women's mouths." Deng Ziyu handed the paper bag to him, covered his mouth, and turned to leave. Looking at his subordinate's comical appearance, Fanxian could not help but laugh again. Using the excuse that someone needed to watch over the capital, he chased Shi Chanli out the door. Only then did he break open the first seal on the outside of the large paper bag and pull out a stack of letters. He flipped through them and, not surprisingly, found Haitong's letter. Deng Ziyu's strange behavior earlier was naturally because of this letter. The Overwatch Council's seal used rosin and silver cinnabar. They did not use lamp coal, so the safety factor was higher. Furthermore, the envelope was specially seamless, so there was no need to worry about someone deftly opening it on the way. First, he read through the information from the Qinian unit in the capital, and then looked over the intelligence reports from the other places that the Third Bureau had presented. Fanxian nodded with satisfaction. Progress in each place had been smooth. Yin Bingyun had acted very quickly, and the Chui family would not be able to escape. The news had spread to Jiangnan, and even the Chui family's in-laws, the Ming family, had begun to move their wealth and goods. This move of striking the mountain to scare the tiger was beginning to take effect. Finally, he glanced at the council reports and picked up the letter that Haitang had sent. This had always been his principle. When doing things, he should put the public first and then the private. But after he finished reading Haitang's seemingly ordinary letter, he regretted that he had read it too late, even if it was only for a short while. Because the contents of the letter were too shocking. Fanxian's slender fingers gripped the thin paper, and he could not help but tremble. His expression was serious. Chapter 322. The content of Haitang's letter was very simple. The words and sentences were not overflowing with ancient meaning. It was written in the light style of Fan Anji. The full text was copied below. "Is Anji safe? I received the previous letter. Your country's postal route is indeed incomparably convenient. A month's journey took only 10 days. Counting back, you said it was the first snow in the capital when you wrote the letter. On that day, it had already snowed a few times in Shangjing, and it didn't stop. The weather was so cold that it was tiresome. I have a strange temperament. Others may easily get sleepy in spring and autumn, but I like to get sleepy in winter. It's just that the snow outside is heavy, and all the green is covered by the dull white. There are no beautiful scenery to entertain the eyes, no branches to break into rings, no flowers to get close to and smell. Although there are a few plum blossoms in the garden, the Qi Kingdom is colder this year than in the past. The few wax-red buds bloom miserably, and after being frozen by the ice and snow, they have no energy at all. I can't bring myself to admire them. The donkey you saw has already been sold. Don't worry, the little fellow is still helping to pull the millstone. In any case, there aren't many soybeans, and it only needs to make 50 revolutions a day. With the money from selling the donkey, I bought some bamboo charcoal. You said that if the room's ventilation isn't good, it's easy to get poisoned, so I made a chimney according to the blueprints you sent. Needless to say, The air in the room is much better. The chicks have long grown up, but I'm still worried about them freezing, so I keep them in the house. Naturally, they don't smell good, but as you know, I have a servant now, so I clean and wash them every day. It's passable. Lord Wong came to the garden a few times and invited me to a meal. However, he said that he can't drink wine. After thinking about it, I rejected him. After all, you know that I like to watch people drink, and I especially like to watch people get drunk. Half a year ago, at the Pine House restaurant, I liked the little song you sang when you were drunk. It was the verdict from Story of the Stone, Leaving You Ching. A few days ago, I sang it to my teacher, and he liked it very much. He said that Sister Chiao's life was pitiful, but there was something interesting about it that was worth pondering. That day, the wind and snow outside the house were very heavy, and the chill invaded the house. Teacher and I sat across from each other, drinking tea and laughing as we talked about the affairs of the ruler. I don't know why, but I thought of the days I spent with you in Shanjing a few months ago. It was clean and natural, and the feeling was extremely beautiful. It was as if I saw you, that bright moon, that small temple, that ridge of fields, and you ran out of the ridge in a sorry state. Right, there's a piece of news that shocked me. I heard that Lord Xiao's remains were discovered in the cliffs of the Western Mountains. Although he's already been buried, I thought about how you once traveled north with this old man. So I wanted to tell you so that you can rest at ease. When Fan Xian saw this, he only felt that it was a little strange. It seemed that there were many hidden meanings in the village girl's words, but he was so shocked by his brother's pitiful life that he laughed in spite of himself and didn't notice. Immediately after, he was pleasantly surprised by Haitong's words. Was she really willing to pass on the heart of Tianyi Dao to him? Thus, he still hadn't guessed the true message that Haitang wanted to pass on, but he thought about it again. Finally, from the finding of Shaoan's body, Kui talking about him, and guessing riddles, he smelled an inauspicious feeling. Especially that line, Sister Chiao's life was pitiful, but it was interesting. He furrowed his brows and read it again. Finally, his gaze fell on the line, bright moon, small temple, and ridge of fields. The appearance of this line was rather abrupt and did not fit in with the rest of the text. This line was talking about the most embarrassing scene of Fan Xian's life. After he was drugged with an aphrodisiac, he tossed and turned, pulling up his pants and running out of the small temple. At that time, frogs croaked and the field was wet. This should be what Haidang wanted to tell him. Running out of the field from the ridge of fields? Fan Xian furrowed his brows, and a thought flashed through his mind. He put aside the 3 useless words about drinking in front of the bright moon temple and only looked at the last line. For Fan Xian, this kind of riddle seemed very simple. Running out of the field, it was naturally an ancient character. No, it was the character Yi, the leaf of the lotus leaf, the leaf of the lotus leaf. Yi Qingmei's leaf. Fan Xian's face was full of shock. His fingers holding the letter trembled slightly. Thinking of the secret words in the letter and his past, he immediately understood what Haidang wanted to tell him. Kui knew he was a descendant of a Yi family. He took a deep breath and rubbed his stiff cheeks, forcing himself to calm down. He didn't want this sudden news to throw his heart into chaos. The meaning in Haitong's letter was very clear. Since she had secretly sent him the message, it meant that Kui, who had already grasped the mystery of his past, already had a plan to release this information. That was why she was in such a rush to tell him and let him plan early. At this moment, there was no time to guess where the great grandmaster had gotten the ability to determine his relationship with the Yi family. The first question in front of Fan Xian was how he should face the upcoming situation. Judging from the time when Northern Qi released the news that he was a descendant of a Yi family, the rumors would grow wings and fly. At most, they would be a few days slower than the Overwatch Council's intelligence network. At the latest, within 10 days, presumably, the streets and alleys of Jingdo would begin to spread this news. Everyone would open their mouths wide behind his back to express their shock. Logically speaking, no one would be able to obtain any concrete evidence. No one could prove that Fan Xian was a descendant of a Yi family. At most, Northern Qi would just release a few rumors. But Fan Xian knew that rumors had great destructive power. Once something happened, people would purposely and extremely dig up some of the oddities after he entered the capital because of this rumor and gradually believe this truth. Furthermore, this was the truth. The human heart was a wondrous thing. Before someone thought of something, they would not connect Fan Xian to the Yi family for no reason. But once someone started it, this seed of suspicion would be planted in the heart and gradually take root and sprout. It would take over everything in the heart and turn a rumor into a universally acknowledged knowledge. It was just that no one dared to say it out loud. As for those people in the past, those in the palace, and those who had conflicts of interest with him, the fact that he was a descendant of a Yi family would certainly make them suddenly see the light. They would be the ones who believed this the most. Only, he didn't know how his past would be used by the other party. Fan Xian's lips were a bit dry. He turned around and picked up the teapot on the table and gulped down 2 mouthfuls. The tea had been added by Chanli later, so it was a bit hot. It made him shiver. After a moment of shock, he viciously threw the teapot to the ground and cursed a few times. With a bang, the porcelain teapot fell to the ground and shattered. Porcelain shards flew in all directions. It wasn't that he hadn't thought about the day when his mysterious past would be exposed by someone. Furthermore, regarding this half of the Yi family, he was filled with anticipation. There would come a day when he would loudly say in front of the entire world that he was Yi Qingmei's son. But it shouldn't be like this. Before Fan Xian had any time to prepare his thoughts or take action, this shocking news would spread throughout Jingdou and bring him unpredictable danger and powerful shock. No one would know what would happen. Fan Xian hated this feeling of being passive. He was also slightly afraid that, for the first time, the situation had completely left his control. That was why he felt helpless and angry. His feet stepped over the broken porcelain shards and walked with a wooden expression to the open glass window. Looking at the cold snow and north wind outside, he was silent for a long time. He didn't know how many times he took a deep breath before he finally calmed down and began to prepare to face this sudden situation. At this moment, the servant girls who had heard the noise in his room hurried over. They were frightened by his unsightly expression and didn't dare to enter the room to tidy up. Fan Xian shook his head and waved his hand to signal for the servant girls to leave. He picked up the stack of letters again and prepared to destroy them all. As usual, he clasped his hands together and wanted to crush the letters into powder. Unexpectedly, the letters were rolled up, but they did not break. He was slightly startled, and a bitter smile rose to the corner of his lips. Haidong's letter had shocked him so much that he had forgotten the pitiful state of having no Jinqi in his body. Going around the winding corridor, he came to the quietest room in the manor. Fan Xian didn't knock on the door. He pushed it open and entered. Although he had no Jinqi, he had brute force. The doorpost gave a crisp crack and broke. Fei Jie, who was carefully mixing pills in the room, raised his somewhat tired face and looked at his student. He coughed and said, "What happened? Why are you so flustered?" Fan Xian looked at his teacher and said directly, "Sir, something big is going to happen." Fei Jie was startled. What could have caused this little monster to be so flustered? After Fan Xian told him the news that Haidong had risked her life to send, Fei Jie also immediately panicked. He rubbed his powder-covered hands and tangled his messy hair. He couldn't say anything for a while. Fan Xian looked at this scene and couldn't help but sigh to himself. He knew that coming to find his teacher in a moment of desperation was not a good idea. Fei Jie was a grandmaster when it came to refining poison to kill people, but when it came to making decisions and scheming against the enemy, that was not his strong point. "I'll go down the mountain immediately. I'll go down the mountain immediately." Master and disciple spoke at the same time. They looked at each other and immediately understood what the other meant. Fei Jie narrowed his brown eyes, which were full of murderous intent. "I'll go to Qinggarten. You go find the minister. We'll split up." Yes, when a situation developed like this, master and disciple thought of the 2 old foxes in the capital at the same time. Fan Xian bowed with a headache and turned to order his subordinates to arrange a carriage. Just as he was about to leave, Fei Jie suddenly said, "Don't be afraid." Fan Xian turned his head in shock. Fei Jie's voice was sharp. With a not-quite-there smile, he said sinisterly, "Don't be afraid, kid. What happened a dozen years ago will not happen again. Master and disciple can poison tens of thousands of people to death and then kill our way out of the capital. Who can stop us?" Fan Xian shivered. His teacher was indeed looking out for him, but he was afraid that he was not as ruthless as him. There was no time to say anything to the girls in the manor. They only said goodbye to Cici, who was embroidering. Fan Xian and Fei Jie split up into two carriages and followed the difficult snowy mountain road down Song Mountain. Along the way, the wheels of the carriage crushed countless pieces of ice and rolled up a few threads of cold mud. The guards in charge of protection were split into two groups. Half of the swordsmen of the 6th Bureau followed these two people down the mountain. Gouda and the Tiger Guards were carefully left on the mountain by Fan Xian. In the evening, the carriage Fei Jie was entered the manor on the outskirts of the capital, which was even more magnificent and noble than the royal palace under tight security. Old Fei, the old servant guarding the door, saw Sir Fei disembark from the carriage with a cold expression. He couldn't help but feel confused. He wasn't sure what had happened. In a short while, the garden was brightly lit. Fei Jie and Chun Pingping in the wheelchair walked out of the garden gate with serious expressions. Under the protection of the attendants, they climbed into the carriage. Entering the palace, Chun Pingping said coldly. However, as soon as he finished speaking, his expression immediately softened, and he said softly, "And here I was wondering how important the matter was for the two of you to be so flustered." Fei Jie rubbed his hands together in shock. "If this isn't a big thing, then what is?" Chun Pingping gently stroked the smooth handles of the wheelchair and laughed mockingly. "You old man, you're soaking in medicine every day. It's one thing if you don't understand at once, but Fan Xian disappoints me greatly. As long as you pay a little attention, you'll know that this matter is not a problem. Never mind, child. This matter has been suppressed in his heart for too long. Now that it has been exposed by someone, it's inevitable that he will feel some fear." The carriage rattled toward Jingdao. In a short while, it passed through the city gates. The gates were not yet closed. Of course, even if they were closed, if the director of the Overwatch Council wanted to enter the capital, even the Qin family of the Jingdao garrison would not dare to stop him. When the carriage was about to reach the royal palace, Chun Pingping opened his eyes and lightly said, "This is not a bad thing. It is a good thing." Fei Jie shook his head. "I don't care. I'm going to go to the council and have the people of the 8th Bureau prepare." The sound of keys being unlocked came from the palace gates. Chun Pingping had the exclusive right to enter the palace at any time. His position was extraordinary. The old man tilted his head to listen to the familiar voice. Without expression, he said, "After the news reaches Jingdao, have them suppress it for a few days. At least this kind of superficial effort has to be put on for people to see. As for Fan Xian's past, there will come a day when it will be revealed. Now is the best time." In the study of Fan Manor, the Minister of Revenue of the Qing Kingdom, Fan Jian, was sipping on a sourberry as he looked at Fan Xian in front of him. A mocking smile appeared at the corner of his lips. "Finally, seeing you so anxious, I always thought your heart was made of ice." Fan Xian smiled bitterly. "Father, at this time, why are you still joking? When the news reaches Jingdao, what exactly should we do?" He looked into his father's eyes and was silent for a moment. Faintly, he said, "Since this matter has been hidden from the world for so many years, presumably there is someone who does not want me to appear." Fan Jian looked at his son with clear eyes and quietly said, "But the reality is that you have already appeared, and appeared very beautifully. In the end, your relationship with the Yi family cannot be hidden forever. If you want to choose a time to expose it, I believe that now is the best time." Chapter 323. The best time. Fan Xian looked at his father in confusion. For some reason, seeing his father so calm, his mood also relaxed. He was no longer as anxious as he had been in the mountains. He laughed self-mockingly, tossed aside the crutch under his arm, and sat down in the chair. "Be careful of your wound." Fan Jian shook his head and said disapprovingly. Fan Xian smiled and gently rubbed the area below his chest. There was a faint pain inside, but with Sir Fei's skillful nursing, it was more or less healed. "Tell me, what exactly are you afraid of?" Fan Jian gently stroked the long beard on his chin. The minister, who had always been upright and serious, finally revealed a sense of confidence and confidence. Fan Xian was startled. He furrowed his brows and thought for a while. Only then did he realize that he had indeed panicked. What exactly was he afraid of? He sorted out his hidden worries in his heart and said sincerely, "If this news spreads, the discussions of the people under heaven will be unusually turbulent. If the palace knows of my past, who knows how it will be handled?" "Handled?" Fan Jian laughed coldly. "Do you think the palace still doesn't know of your past?" Fan Xian fell silent. He knew his father was right. The emperor knew better than anyone that he was a descendant of the Yi family. As for the Empress Dowager, looking at her expression at the winter solstice lamb banquet, he guessed that she had long known. It was just that this mother and son pair had hidden it from the world. They wanted to hide it from the world, but they can't hide it anymore. "The development of things will always change," Fan Xian said calmly. "Furthermore, if the Empress knows I am a descendant of the Yi family, what will she think? Based on what you said, there is an irreconcilable grudge between the Yi family and her." Fan Jian shook his head and said coldly, "There is no need to consider the Empress. This woman is the weakest empress in history. What you need to consider is whether or not the crown prince of the Eastern Palace will be persuaded by her to deal with you." The Empress's family power had been completely wiped out by the Qing Emperor a dozen years ago on the night Jingdo bled with blood. Fan Jian, who had never shown his power, had played the biggest role in it. Of course, he knew that the Empress would not be able to make any moves. The crown prince. Fan Jian's lips curved into a faint smile. "He's a smart man. With your current status and power, he only wants you to maintain balance. Why would he take the initiative to flirt with you because of what happened in the past?" Fan Xian lowered his head slightly. A moment later, he said, "Where is the eldest princess?" Everyone under heaven knew that the Yi family's property had been taken by the Qing royal family and became the present palace treasury. Back then, when they forcibly seized the #1 merchant house in the world, they naturally used a very frightening excuse, such as treason. But now, there was suddenly a legendary orphan of the Yi family. Should they investigate the crimes of the past? Even if they didn't investigate, in the eyes of many people, the descendants of the Yi family were targets that the royal family had to eliminate. This was the rule of history, and no one could escape it. After the news that Fan Xian was a descendant of the Yi family spread, the eldest princess would certainly use this matter to make a big deal out of it, forcing the palace to respond accordingly. Tracing back to the matter of the Yi family's property being seized, according to the usual methods of the royal family, it would be good enough if Fan Xian wasn't secretly killed, let alone a meteoric rise. Of course, the other half of Fan Xian's past was also very strange, so he didn't have to worry about the mother and son in the palace trying to kill him. In fact, they wouldn't even see him as someone they needed to be wary of. But what annoyed him was that the world didn't know this truth. If the mother and son in the palace wanted to hide it from the world for a long time, they could only treat Fan Xian as a pure descendant of the Yi family. Under the pressure of public opinion, they could let Fan Xian and the palace treasury, and even the Overwatch Council leave. For Fan Xian, who had already made countless enemies, losing the power in his hands was quite dangerous. The eldest princess? Fan Jian's face was expressionless. If she was smart enough, she would watch from the sidelines this time and not act. Why? Because of the emperor's intentions. Fan Xian was deep in thought, and he gradually understood what his father meant. Of course, the emperor was someone who knew of his past. Although he didn't know what the emperor would do in the future, At least for now, he had no intention of lifting the cloth on the table. After learning of this matter, presumably the emperor's reaction was the same as his. After the shock, he felt a glimmer of anger and madness. The emperor and Fan Xian were both people who liked to control everything, so it was a taboo for things like this to happen that were out of control. Thus, the emperor would certainly be very angry. His first thought would be to find the person who leaked the secret. If the eldest princess took this opportunity to attack Fan Xian on a large scale, the emperor would instead protect Fan Xian with great strength and distance himself from the eldest princess in his heart. Fan Jian faintly said, "You are now the commissioner of the Overwatch Council. Through the actions of this half a year, you have sufficient power in your hands. From Danzhou to Jingdou, regardless of whether it is me or Director Chun, everything we have done is to help you forge the foundation under your feet a bit more firmly." You are now a heavy stone. How can you be afraid of the cool breeze brushing against your face? Don't worry, those winds can no longer move you. Fan Xian was silent. He had other worries in his heart. Of course, there are also celestial winds in this world, Fan Jian mockingly said. What you are afraid of is nothing more than the attitude of the palace. However, the Empress Dowager and the Emperor both know of this matter. At most, they will temporarily give you the cold shoulder for a few days due to public opinion. In the end, how this matter develops will depend on the Emperor's attitude. In the end, this experienced and far-sighted Minister of Revenue said, "Through the assassination in the Hanging Temple, the Emperor believes deeply in your loyalty, so he will be partial to you. Right now, your injuries have not healed. The Emperor will always remember your contributions. At this time, your past has been exposed. The Emperor will do his best to think on your behalf. Regardless of whether it is the interests of the royal family, the Empress, the Crown Prince, or even the pressure of the eldest princess and Empress Dowager. Compared to the sword you blocked for the Emperor, the two cancel each other out." Fan Jian smiled coldly. "Thus, this is the best opportunity. You know these things in the palace, even if I don't say it. Perhaps after a few years, the Emperor's fondness for you for saving the Emperor will fade, and you will no longer be able to use it. Exposing your past can only be done in a few days. Not earlier, not later." This was the best opportunity. Fan Xian savored the coldness in these words in his heart. A bitter smile rose to his face. "I am just worried that this matter will bring trouble to my family." The Fan family took an orphan of the Yi family? Although this was the Emperor's arrangement, if things got out of hand, the Emperor would certainly not admit to it. The Fan manor would be the unlucky ones. Fan Jian slowly closed his eyes. A gratified smile appeared at the corner of his lips. Slowly, he said, "Silly child, if even you cannot make a move, why would they make a move on me? If the court makes a move on me, does that not prove that you are a descendant of the Yi family?" Fan Xian's eyes widened. A moment later, he said, "You mean, no matter what the outside world says, we will not admit to it, even if we die?" "Of course." Fan Jian smiled. "Who can have proof?" Fan Xian sighed. "What a shame. I originally thought that since there would not be any repercussions, I could use this opportunity to reverse the verdict for the Yi family." Fan Jian laughed loudly. "No wonder you were so nervous earlier. You had big plans. Child, why must the cases of this world be overturned in the open? A dozen years ago, the Emperor had already overturned the case for the Yi family once. This is just the aftermath." Fan Xian shook his head. Lowering his voice, he said, "The matter of being a descendant of the Yi family should not scare me. It's just," he was going to say that he was worried that the eldest princess and others with ulterior motives would guess that he carried royal blood. But just as the words were about to leave his lips, he suddenly realized and stopped. Regarding his relationship with the Emperor, Fan Xian and his father had never talked about it directly. All this time, father and son had wisely not brought it up. They did their best to maintain the current harmonious scene. Fan Jian understood what his son wanted to say. He fell silent. After a long time, he sighed. "That matter, you should hide it in your heart. As for whether or not other people can guess it, what does it matter? I'll I will say it clearly. Director Chun has probably been happily waiting for this matter to happen. After the rumor reaches Jingdo, he will certainly use the power in his hands to forcefully suppress the rumor and thus confirm this rumor. Then, he will wait for the people under heaven to gradually guess your past. At least, he will let the people under heaven get used to the rumor of your past. Fan Xian was silent. He knew his father's calculations were very reasonable. The old cripple's way of doing things was obvious. Forcefully suppressing the rumor of a descendant of a Yi family could make the people of the Qing kingdom believe this rumor. This was a very clever method. As for the matter of him being the emperor's illegitimate child, what exactly does Chen Pingping want to do? Fan Xian's mood suddenly became very tired. He asked his father weakly, "I don't know." The minister, who had never displayed his strength or intelligence, slowly said, "You should have guessed that Director Chun and I have never thought the same way. On the matter of you, I have argued with him for many years. Furthermore, I don't have the habit of trusting him. Strangely, he also doesn't seem to trust me. On the contrary, he and I trust you a bit more." He glanced at his son and laughed self-mockingly. In the end, it seems that he still won and successfully dragged you into this mess. He continued lightly, "I even suspect that this matter was single-handedly done by him. Otherwise, how could the Northern Qi people know that Xiao Yezi is your mother? Of course, you don't have to worry too much right now. Presumably, Director Chun has already entered the palace to help you plan the end of this matter." Father and son fell silent. After a long time, Fan Xian suddenly and thoughtlessly said, "Sorry, father." It was a very unreasonable apology. He didn't know what he was apologizing for. Was he apologizing for the fact that, in the end, he had taken over the Overwatch Council and was forced onto the path of power struggle? Was he apologizing for not choosing a more peaceful life like his father? Or was he apologizing for his strange past and bringing unknown danger to the Fan family? Or was he apologizing on behalf of his mother to his father? Or, sorry, I really want to be your true son. It's just that my mother won't give me this opportunity." Minister Fan was guessing whether or not Chen Pingping had used Fan Xian's injuries to save the emperor. This was the best opportunity to expose his identity as a descendant of the Yi family. At the same time, deep in the palace, Chen Pingping was also endlessly guessing who had suddenly created this mess. Politicians did not care much about those things in name. So these two old foxes only hoped that Fan Xian could live a happy life and hold power in his hands. They did not think that Fan Xian had to return to the Yi family in a proper manner. The only people who know of this matter are me, Fan Jian, Madame Fan, His Majesty, and Fei Jia. Chen Pingping sat in his wheelchair, and his dry and slightly sharp voice rang out in the royal study. His Majesty said earlier that the Empress Dowager found out about this matter after the spring imperial examinations. That means that there were only 6 people. In my opinion, none of these 6 people could have leaked it. The Emperor slowly turned around. His usually clear eyes were burning with anger today. They were as sharp and vicious as an eagle's. None of them could have leaked it? Then how did the Northern Qi people find out? After the spring imperial examinations, Fan Xian's identity as the commissioner of the Overwatch Council was exposed. From then on, he became the most famous of the young officials of the Kingdom of Qing, especially since he was about to take control of the palace treasury. This kind of power was truly overwhelming. Normal people wouldn't have been able to guess anything, but the Empress Dowager deep in the palace had long been involved in the affairs of the state. She was used to seeing dark and filthy things, and her sense of politics was quite sharp. Under her forceful interrogation, the emperor finally admitted to his mother that Fan Xian was his illegitimate son. After the Empress Dowager recovered from her shock, she finally accepted this reality. After all, no matter how much she hated the witch of the past, there was always a degree of tolerance for the royal bloodline. Perhaps the Northern Qi people guessed it. Chen Pingping said to himself in a low voice, but he didn't know that he had guessed the answer closest to the truth. The emperor laughed coldly. What kind of person is Ku He? Does the imperial advisor of Northern Qi dare to come to a conclusion based on mere speculation? Chun Pingping was silent for a long time before saying, "The eldest princess is the most suspicious." If Fan Xian had been eavesdropping at this moment, he would certainly have yelled out in praise. What was this? This was the legendary great skill without work, great sound without sound, and running naked framing. The Empress Dowager knew that Fan Xian was a descendant of the Yi family, and the eldest princess was the Empress Dowager's most beloved daughter. She had once backhandedly sold Yin Bingyun to Northern Qi, and had also had private dealings with the Northern Qi aristocrat, Zhuang Mohan. She had private correspondence with the Northern Qi Empress Dowager, and her smuggling routes to Northern Qi had saved the people of Northern Qi who knew how much silver. Because of the transfer of the palace treasury, she hated Fan Xian to the bone. She had even begun to use assassinations, but she had failed. These were all facts that the emperor was well aware of. As long as one analyzed it carefully, one would find that the eldest princess had the highest possibility of knowing of this matter. She had the best way to pass the information through Northern Qi. Most importantly, she had the greatest motive. Chun Pingping's earlier words were also very particular. If he had vaguely and secretly pointed out that there was someone in the palace who had good relations with Northern Qi, and thus made the emperor think of his sister far away in Xinjiang, he would not have dared to be so rebellious and directly point out the eldest princess's name. The emperor would certainly have been a little suspicious of his intentions. Yet, for him to so directly and openly say the eldest princess's name, saying that she was the most suspicious, was the performance of a purely loyal official. He only cared about whether or not his opinion would be useful to the emperor, and did not care about whether or not it would cause the emperor to suspect him. This kind of performance, of course, greatly pleased the always shrewd emperor. The emperor fell silent, but his expression appeared somewhat ugly. After a moment, he said, "It looks like Yunrui does not know Fan Xian, does not know that in Ji is my flesh and blood." If the Empress Dowager had also told this matter to the eldest princess, then the eldest princess would certainly not have exposed Fan Xian's past, because that would no longer be targeting Fan Xian, but targeting the emperor. Chun Pingping nodded slightly. From the emperor's words, he knew that the emperor already believed that the eldest princess was the source of this rumor. After a moment, the emperor coldly said, "Wait for the news and see if Yunrui will send a letter." Fan Xian was a descendant of the Yi family. If the eldest princess sent a letter to the palace and used this as an opportunity to persuade the emperor to be wary of this matter, or to directly persuade his brother to kill Fan Xian and destroy the Fan family, then the emperor would truly look lightly on the relationship between brother and sister. What should we do next? Chun Pingping coughed. Because he had entered the palace in a hurry, his grizzled hair had not been tied up too tightly. It was a bit disheveled and made him appear even older. The emperor glanced at him and suddenly smiled bitterly and sighed. "This life of mine can be considered glorious. Who would have thought that in my prime, I would become a true loner? Other than you and Brother Jian, I can't find anyone I can completely trust." Chun Pingping was slightly startled and was about to say something when the emperor sighed and waved his hand. "Do you remember what reason the Empress Dowager used to expropriate the Yi family?" "Rebellion." "Yes." The emperor expressionlessly said, "Back then, the two of you also approved of this suggestion. After all, the things Xiao Yezi left behind could not be messed up or let go. After she left, only the royal family had the power to collect them and protect the Yi family's businesses to continue operating." "Correct," Chun Pingping calmly said. "At the time, I thought that since she was already gone, she probably wouldn't mind if I put a crime on her. I didn't think that 17 years later, it would become somewhat troublesome." The emperor coldly said, "What's so troublesome about it? The edict came from my mouth. If I rehabilitate the Yi family, who in the world would dare to make irresponsible remarks?" "You can't." Chun Pingping's resolute and decisive reply seemed to have exceeded the emperor's expectations. "Your Majesty feels pity for that child, but this matter must not be done. After all, your majesty must consider the feelings of the elderly. The old cripple's heart was like a mirror. Although the emperor's move had no name, it was the last test. The emperor knew he was talking about the Empress Dowager. After thinking for a while, he nodded and said, "It looks like you already have a plan in mind." Chun Ping Ping smiled bitterly and replied, "This matter happened suddenly, and your majesty did not have an edict, so there was no plan prepared." The meaning of these words was clear. The emperor had always wanted Fan Xian's past to remain hidden. Of course, the council had not thought of this matter. His tone changed, and he continued, "However, it is not a big problem. If there is a letter from Xinyang, ask your majesty to severely reprimand them. Your majesty will also warn a few princes. As for Fan Xian's side, make him refuse to admit it no matter what. Even if the officials are suspicious, presumably no one would dare to submit any memorials based on baseless rumors. And Ji will inevitably feel awkward. How will he conduct himself in court? In the next year, he will have to go far away to Jiangnan on official business. He can coincidentally avoid this discussion." Chen Pingping smiled in a small voice. "Your Majesty, although this matter is troublesome, now that it has exploded, the timing is not bad. Have Fan Xian far away from important places in Jingdou. If this drags on for 2 years, the matter will naturally fade away." "Can it fade away?" The emperor narrowed his eyes and asked. "Sea Lily is on Lujing River. People say she is the descendant of some prince. It has been passed on. Other than making the pleasure boat's business a little better, there are no major problems. As for Fan Xian's past," Chen Pingping sighed, "let the world have one more piece of harmless gossip." The emperor thought deeply for a long time and then made a sound of agreement through his nose. "The newspapers can also use this matter to make some splendor," Chen Pingping continued. The emperor also smiled. "However, we have to guard against that matter." Chen Pingping glanced at the emperor and spoke with a glimmer of sorrow. "As for the empress, I will have my mother appear." The emperor nodded and sighed. "If I can't give him a title, I've already let down this son of mine." Half a month later, a piece of news began to spread through the streets and alleys of Jingdou. The news said that the currently popular Sir Fan Jr. in court, the commissioner of the Overwatch Council, was actually the descendant of the old Yi family. It had been nearly 20 years since the Yi family had been sealed off for treason. Unexpectedly, there were still descendants, and it was the Sir Fan Jr. that the people of Jingdou loved to talk about. After this rumor shocked the people of Jingdou, they began to become excited. They all whispered to each other and spread this gossip. In less than 2 days, the entire Jingdou knew of this rumor. If this rumor was true, then the Fan Manor, which was harboring a court criminal, was in for a bloody misfortune. The officials of Jingdou, who had been greatly offended by Fan Xian, began to excitedly plan an attack. Of course, under the circumstances that the palace had not spoken, these officials did not dare to act on their own. After all, it was only a rumor and there was no proof. Thinking of how Fan Xian would rather give up a generation of literary fame to enter the Overwatch Council and take over the palace treasury that reeked of money, the people of Jingdou and officials all began to mutter in their hearts. They began to believe the truth of this rumor a little more. Unexpectedly, the palace maintained its silence. It was as if no one had heard of this matter. However, the Overwatch Council began to move. Risking the danger of being scolded by the imperial censors, the 8th Bureau began to arrest the common people in the restaurants and tea houses who dared to spread the rumor. In the afternoon, in Esher Tavern, the customers in the tavern looked at each other. They were all people of some status, but they did not expect the officials of the 8th Bureau of the Overwatch Council to be so unreasonable and arrest the 2 scholars who had been spouting spittle. From the reaction of the Overwatch Council, people increasingly believed that Commissioner Fan must have had some connection to the old Yi family. Inside the Overwatch Council, Chun Pingping, with a wool blanket on his knees, lifted a corner of the black curtain and looked at the silent people walking on the street. A strange smile rose to the corners of his lips. "I know who your mother is, but I don't know who your father is. What are you afraid of?" My book friend Ryu is so cute. A few days ago, my stomach was in so much pain. After reading that post, I laughed until my stomach hurt even more. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.